I once met this dude named Matt when I was out with friends at a bar one summer. I was out with a big group, and Matt and I made friends at the bar, vibing over the Cubs game that was on. My group kind of dispersed away from me as I spoke with Matt, so it wasn't like Matt really spoke to any of my friends. We ended up exchanging Instagrams, and he had a decent amount of followers on Instagram, and his pictures made him seem like a normal 20-something-year-old dude who likes to go out, travel, and stay active. After we exchanged info, I went to go find my group. Honestly, whenever you bro out with another guy while you're at a bar, the odds of ever actually contacting each other again after exchanging info are slim to none. You always act like you'll hit them up, but come the next day when you're sober, you just have no interest. Well, the next day, which was a Saturday, I went out to another bar/restaurant with my friends. This was an outdoor spot on the water. It was for my friend Tyler's birthday. I put something on my Instagram story as we all sang at the bar for him. After about an hour, we were done with dinner and just hanging around the outside section of the bar when I got a tap on my shoulder. I turned around and it was Matt. He dabbed me up with a smile and said this was his favorite Saturday night spot. I introduced Matt more officially to my friends this time, saying, "You guys remember Matt?" Even if they hadn't really spoken to him, they did see him the night before. Well, as the night went on, Matt kind of hung around for a while, and it was fine because everyone was drunk, including him, and everyone was just having a good time. The next time I saw Matt was when he invited me golfing on a hot day. Honestly, I suck at golfing, but it's something I want to get better at, so when he invited me early one Sunday morning, I went. I think it was literally the following weekend after I saw him last. It was just him and I going. I tried to get a couple of my friends to go, but they were too hungover and said it was too early. Matt and I just vibed playing golf. I think it was only 9 holes. It took us like 2 hours. Afterwards, we got food, and then I went home to relax before work the next day. I saw Matt one more time out after that, before he invited me on a hiking trip with him to Arizona. Honestly, Arizona and the Grand Canyon were always on my bucket list. I just checked the dates with work and confirmed I was able to go first, and I was an immediate yes. I asked Tyler and a couple of other friends to come with, but they were heavy no's. They said they couldn't get the time off work and needed to save money, the typical responses from any of my friends when I try to get them on a trip. I asked Matt if any of his boys were going, and he said nah, he was going solo dolo. I actually hadn't met any of Matt's friends yet. His Instagram painted him as this super popular guy though, so I didn't find it weird. We flew out on August 15th, and our return flights to Chicago were August 18th. We landed at night. Matt rented a car for the weekend, and on the way to the Airbnb, we stopped for food and alcohol. By the time we got to the Airbnb, it was late. We had a couple of beers when we got there, and I could tell that Matt was down to stay up longer, but I was admittedly shot and wanted to go to sleep. This was when I realized there was only one bed in the Airbnb. I had never asked him to confirm that there were 2 bedrooms. When I brought it up, he pointed to the couch I was sitting on and said it's a pull-out couch. He then said relax and that he's not going to charge me for the Airbnb. Honestly, a free stay in Arizona, I couldn't complain about the couch. I pulled out the sofa bed, set up the sheets, and went to sleep. It was surprisingly comfortable. In the middle of the night, I woke up to Matt walking through the living room to the kitchen to get water. I'm a light sleeper. The sound of a pin drop will make me wake up. I rolled over and went back to sleep. The next morning, Matt woke me up early. It was a sunny, gorgeous day, and we drove straight to the Grand Canyon. I had no idea just how massive it truly was, or how many individual trail options there were. We hiked the Bright Angel, I think. I didn't realize how out of shape I was until that day. Matt was perfectly fine, laughing and telling me to keep up while I was dripping in sweat and out of breath. We took numerous breaks, which we used to take a million amazing pictures. It was beautiful. Eventually, we got back to the car. We had been hiking for over 2 to 3 hours, and I needed food. We stopped by a deli on the way back. It was a long drive back to Phoenix, and when we got there, we took a midday nap, and then after that, we explored around Phoenix. And of course, in Matt fashion, we drank at multiple bars. I barely knew the guy, but I could already see he liked his alcohol. Fast forward, we got really, really drunk. but I think I got drunker, and I'm not sure how, because Matt was downing as many drinks as me. We had to leave the rental on the street and Uber back to the Airbnb. It was late. Time flew by somehow. I don't remember much besides Matt blasting music in the Airbnb for a bit and my plugging my phone in next to the couch. I guess I just went to sleep after that. That night, I woke up randomly, probably a couple of hours after I fell asleep. My bladder was about to explode and my mouth was drier than the Grand Canyon. I got off the couch and headed toward the bathroom, but I heard something. A crack in the floor, like a crack from pressure. I scanned around the dark room with my eyes and saw nothing, so I went to the bathroom. While I was in there, midstream, I heard a door clicking shut. It had to be Matt's bedroom door. When I finished peeing, I went to try Matt's door, but it was locked. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. Whatever, I went back to the couch and fell back asleep pretty easily. The next morning, I woke up at like 8 a.m., head throbbing. The first thing I noticed was my phone. It was in a weird position. I had it charging last night and left it laying on the floor next to the couch bed, but now it was sitting on the table next to the couch and it was unplugged. I was questioning why I might have done this, but ultimately my answer was simple. I was just super drunk. That day, we obviously didn't do any hiking, otherwise I would have puked. We just Ubered to the car and then did some driving around, exploring different neighborhoods, scenery, and checking out the botanical gardens. I didn't really want to drink that day, but later on, Matt convinced me, and wouldn't you know it, it was another night of getting really, really drunk. Our flight was at like 1 p.m. the following day, so at least we didn't have to worry about getting up really early. We got back to the Airbnb late again, I'd say between 1 and 2 a.m. this time. Matt insisted on letting me sleep in the bed that night, just because it was fair. Honestly, I didn't argue. I eventually took my bag to his room and then said goodnight and shut the door. I didn't lock it. Not that it mattered, because the locks from what I remembered had those doorknobs with locks that you could easily unlock with like a butter knife or something. I wish I could say the story ended there and that we went home in peace the next day. Well, I woke up that night, probably not long after I fell asleep. I didn't know what woke me up at first. It's like waking up to a sound, but you didn't fully consciously hear that sound because you were still technically asleep when it caused you to wake up. I looked around the room, and then for my phone. My phone was missing. I had it plugged in next to the bed and had the phone on the bed next to me, but now the cord was just dangling from the outlet to the ground with no phone. How could this happen again? I looked on one side of the bed on the floor, and then the other, and I jumped up and screamed at the top of my lungs when I saw Matt laying face down, sprawled out on that side of the bed on the floor. He looked up, looking like he'd just woken up from a deep sleep. I shouted, "What are you doing?" He looked around the room, acting confused, like he didn't know how he got there. He stood up and said that he must have been so blacked out that he just walked in here to go to bed, but then remembered I was in the bed and he crashed on the floor. But that didn't make sense because he was on the side of the bed further from the door. I then accused him of taking my phone, and he played dumb. He said I should check under the bed, maybe it fell. Then he got on his knees, looked under the bed, and instantly said, "Bro, here it is," and he pulled it out from under the bed. I looked at him, and I genuinely felt like I was staring at a different person now. Who was this guy? Did he really try getting into my phone twice? I told him I'll just go back to the couch, but he insisted he would, and then he left the room. You bet your ass I locked the door this time. If it weren't for the phone, sure, I'd just see it as he was really drunk and did something goofy, like come pass out on the floor, but I was detecting bullshit there. He took my phone, and I know it. Since I was still kind of drunk, I didn't really have much trouble falling back asleep. Once again, I wish it ended there, but it didn't. I woke up one more time that night, and this time, I quickly realized why. At the foot of my bed was Matt standing there, but all I could really see was his silhouette. For some reason, I didn't jump or scream this time. He sat down on the bed and started rubbing my foot, and that's when I screamed at him to get out. He wouldn't move, so I had to physically push him off the bed and out the bedroom door. I started packing my clothes into my bag, and then quickly packed all my toiletries and whatever else I packed. He didn't say a word. He sat upright on the couch watching me like a creepy NPC the entire time. It was the most unsettling part. I called an Uber to the airport. I wasn't staying there another minute. He didn't try to stop me. I got to the airport just as the sun was starting to rise, and as hard as I tried to sleep, I couldn't. My mind was just racing. I waited there the entire time for the flight. I paid like $35 to change my seat so I wouldn't be next to Matt. I looked out the window the entire time the plane was boarding so I wouldn't have to make eye contact with him. I didn't tell any of my friends until later that day. I just needed time to process and digest everything. A couple of my friends said, "See, I told you he was weird," and pointed out that both times we ran into him, he was alone. It got me also thinking that the only reason he ran into me at the outdoor bar was because he saw my Instagram story and probably came there. Actual stalker behavior. I blocked his number and Instagram, but before doing so, I went to one of his older Instagram posts where he was with friends. No one was tagged in the picture, but I looked at the comments, and there was one comment from a guy who looked like he was in the picture. I saw that Matt wasn't even following him or vice versa. I took it upon myself to DM the guy, asking if he was still friends with Matt. The guy responded back within 10 minutes saying this: "Nah, guy's a freak, run away." From there, he told me about his own experience along with the other guys who used to be friends with him, who all had to cut him off. The guy untagged himself for Matt's photo, but he said he can't forcibly get him to take down the picture. He wasn't surprised at all when I told him what had happened in Arizona, and the guy's response was, "Guy should be in jail." It's crazy that I thought Matt was just a normal dude who was looking for a bro, but he ended up being a potentially dangerous predator. I still just want to know what he was trying to access on my phone. This happened last summer, around mid-July. I was home from college for a few weeks, and I was just trying to enjoy the break before my next semester started. My name's Kyle, and I live in Maryland. I had been talking with my two closest friends, Jason and Marcus, about doing something together. Just the three of us, like we used to back in high school. We all go to different colleges now, so it's rare that we get time like this. We ended up planning a weekend beach trip to Ocean City. Jason's family owns a small beach house there that they don't use much, and he got permission for us to stay there for a few days. It was nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom place a couple blocks off the sand, but it was perfect for what we needed. Just time to relax, party a bit, and catch up. We drove down on a Friday afternoon. The weather was hot, upper 80s, with that heavy humid air that sticks to your skin. It smelled like sunscreen and salt water the second we got into town. We spent the day walking the boardwalk, messing around in some of the arcades, and people watching. The beach was packed with tourists, kids running around with beach balls, families with umbrellas and coolers, and lifeguards constantly yelling at people to move out of the restricted areas. Everything felt normal. It was just a fun summer day. Later, we went back to the house, grilled burgers, had a few drinks, and started playing drinking games. By midnight, we were drunk and bored, and someone, maybe Marcus, suggested we go back to the beach. There's something weirdly appealing about being near the ocean at night. The beach is almost completely empty, the air cools down, and there's just something peaceful about it. We didn't bring much with us, just some hoodies in case we get cold, our phones, and a flashlight Jason grabbed from the kitchen drawer. We didn't plan to swim around or anything, just hang out and maybe walk along the shore. We headed down a side street and onto the wooden boardwalk, then took the steps down to the sand. As expected, it was basically completely deserted. The waves were steady, and the only light came from a few lamps on the boardwalk and the moon behind some clouds. There was barely enough visibility to make out where the water met the shore. We walked along the edge of the surf, occasionally letting the cold water hit our ankles. We joked around, talked about random stuff, and just killed time. After a while, we stopped near one of the lifeguard towers, those wooden ones they take down at night, and we just laid in the sand looking up at the sky. That's when Jason noticed something. He suddenly sat up and said, "Is that someone walking over there?" We all sat up and looked in the direction he was pointing. At first, I didn't see anything. It just looked like a dark blur near the shoreline. But then, yeah, I saw it. A figure. But it was just a silhouette at that point, walking slowly, right along the edge of where the water touched the sand, probably 50 or 60 yards away. We figured it was just another person out late like us, maybe just going for a walk, but then we noticed that their movement was off. They weren't strolling around like someone enjoying the beach. Their walk was stiff, slow, and almost mechanical. Their arms didn't swing naturally, and their posture was strange. Their head was tilted down, but not fully. It looked like they were staring at the sand or maybe scanning it. We all stopped talking and just quietly watched them. Something about it put me on edge. I remember whispering, "What the hell are they doing?" Marcus suggested that maybe they're just looking for something. Jason joked that it was probably some drunk tourist who dropped their keys. We kinda laughed it off and went back to messing around, but I kept glancing at the person. A few minutes passed, and I noticed they had stopped moving. They weren't walking anymore. They were standing completely still now, and they were definitely closer, maybe 30 yards away. That's when I started feeling uncomfortable. We tried not to stare or shine our light at them, but it was getting hard to ignore. There was just something off about the entire thing. Marcus finally said, "They've been standing there for like 5 minutes. Who just stands like that?" Then Jason said something that made my stomach drop. He said, "He's not just standing, he's looking at you, Kyle." I didn't know if he was joking or not. I kinda laughed nervously and said, "Nah, he's looking at the sand." But Jason shook his head and said, "No, look closer. His head's tilted at you." That's when Jason pointed the flashlight at him. I didn't even want him to do that, honestly, but he clicked it on and aimed the beam. The light hit the figure for just a second before the battery started dying and it flickered out. But that second was enough. I saw him. He was almost grayish white with no shirt. He was wearing wet jeans, clearly from the ocean. His arms hung completely limp at his sides. His head was tilted at a weird angle. Not broken, but unnatural. And his eyes were wide open, almost bulging. The second that beam of light hit him, he moved, fast. Without any hesitation, he broke into a full sprint straight at us. I can't even describe how unnatural it looked. There was no build-up. He went from standing completely still to running at full speed, almost like he launched forward. All three of us screamed and bolted. We didn't even look back, we just ran. I could hear Marcus behind me, yelling "Go!" as our feet pounded into the sand. My lungs were burning. We ran all the way back to the steps leading up to the boardwalk and didn't stop until we got to the street. Only then did we turn around. But he wasn't there. The beach was empty. There were no footprints behind us, just the sound of waves. We stood there frozen, trying to make sense of it. We didn't talk much on the walk back to the house. When we got inside, we locked all the doors and windows, pulled the blinds shut, and stayed up until the sun came up. None of us could sleep. I kept expecting to hear knocking or see that pale face outside the window, but thankfully it never came. The next morning, we tried to laugh it off again, say it was probably just some cracked out homeless guy trying to scare people, but deep down, none of us believed that. The way he moved, the way he appeared out of nowhere, the lack of footprints, it made no sense. We stayed one more night, but we didn't leave the house. We left early the next morning. Over the next few weeks, we tried to move on, but then Jason texted me one night. He said he'd been having dreams, the same dream over and over. He'd wake up and see the guy standing in the corner of his room, soaking wet, head tilted, just staring at him. No movement, no talking, just standing. I told him that was messed up, but I didn't tell him that I was having the exact same dream. Everything was the same, the guy, the posture, just standing in my room, not moving and not talking. Sometimes I wake up thinking I hear the sound of wet footsteps in my hallway. But when I check, no one's there. Then, last week, almost a year later, I was scrolling through this local Facebook group that posts about stuff going on in Ocean City. Someone uploaded a photo they'd taken the night before from the beach. It was grainy and dark, but I recognized what they were talking about. They said, "Does anyone know who this creepy guy is that I saw standing by the water at like 1 a.m.? I clicked the photo. It was blurry, but I recognized him instantly. Same posture, same pale skin. He was just looking down at the water. The comments chilled me even more. There were dozens of people saying they'd seen him too. Some said he was there for hours. One person said they watched him walk into the water and never came back out. Another said they found wet footprints on their back porch 2 streets from the beach, no prints leading to or from them. I don't know what we saw that night, but I know this: I'll never go back to that beach at night again. I grew up in Massachusetts, and every summer since I could remember, I would spend the 3 months in a classic coastal New England town. You know the type if you've been in that area of the country. I had a big group of friends who always did the same thing, and we would get up to all kinds of shenanigans every day after our respective jobs. I was 19 years old when this happened, like most of my friends, and I had just gotten off of a dockboy job I had. So like any other night, I texted my friends what the plan was, and picked up my friend, who I'll call Emerson, from his job to go get alcohol, as he was the one with a fake ID. We got the alcohol and went back to the small town where we lived. We decided to get on my family's boat that I was able to take out on my own, to have some beers while we wait for everyone else to finish what they were doing. We drove around the little peninsula we were on to this place where a lot of people anchor and hang out. There were a couple of boats anchored already, and it was about 7 p.m., but it still wasn't unusual. We found a spot between the 2 boats, threw the anchor down, and just chilled and drank. We were having a nice time, listening to the music from the boat to our left, when the one to our right decided to leave, and then eventually the other boat's music shut off. We thought they were going to leave as well, so Emerson and I, in our new drunken state, began to groan and yell to turn the music back on to keep the party going, and a bunch of other stupid stuff like that, but it didn't happen. We were sitting on the bow and started to drink again before Emerson said, "Dude, look." I turned around to look at the boat and saw 3 people standing on the edge, just looking at us. My first reaction was to laugh because I was drunk, and then I turned back around, but Emerson kept staring at them. Now, admittedly, I don't have a great sense of danger. I tend to be optimistic and lighthearted about most things, but Emerson was obviously uncomfortable. I told him not to worry about it. They were probably just trying to get a better look or something, but he kept looking with an uncomfortable look on his face, which I didn't get at the time. At this point, it's pretty dark, nothing illuminating the area but the lights from their boat, and therefore you couldn't really see who it was, just the silhouettes of these people. After a couple of minutes of trying to get Emerson to snap out of it, I turned back around and saw they were in the same position, staring at us. I thought it was a joke, so I got the megaphone from the compartment over the steering wheel and said, "20 to watch, fellas," which pissed Emerson off because he sensed something wasn't right. I was putting it back when I heard one of them laugh, audibly a man, but something was off about it. It sounded almost sinister. It was slow and low, and it was kind of raspy. It was at that point that I started to feel uncomfortable. Emerson got up and said, "Let's get the hell out of here, bro, this ain't right," but I responded that it was fine. Right after that, we heard 2 splashes in the water from their direction and saw that only one silhouette remained on the boat. That made Emerson immediately start pulling the anchor up, as I was laughing at the situation and at him, which, looking back now, was unbelievably stupid. He tried telling me to turn the engine on while I was laughing my ass off watching him pull the anchor up as I was trying to drink my beer. In fact, I was laughing so much that I didn't notice the sound of the 2 people swimming near our boat. Emerson paused and looked at me with the anchor in his hands, which made me pause too. We couldn't see into the water, as it was dark and the lights were off with the boat. I called out hello and got nothing. Even the sound of the splashing water stopped. Right after that, I simultaneously heard Emerson yell, "Oh shit," and a sudden splash of water behind me before I turned and saw someone trying to climb onto the back of our boat. I freaked the fuck out, and while turning the key, I saw a hand grab the railing on the side of our boat near Emerson, who was yelling and holding the anchor up, ready to fight. I finally turned the boat on and instinctively gunned it forward, smashing into the sandbar that was right in front of us. I put it in reverse and drove backwards as fast as possible until we were out of the little bay and back into more open water. I threw it back in neutral, and Emerson and I just looked at each other before he started giving me the "I told you so's" and "you're a dumbass." I fully agreed and said we should go back, at which he agreed. In hindsight, we should have hightailed it back to the boat docks near my house, but for some reason, we decided to pick up everything that was thrown around during our escape. We didn't even finish before I noticed in the direction we just came from, the lights of a boat approaching, and it was approaching fast. I said no fucking way, and jumped back to the steering wheel and pushed full throttle. Our boat is old, so it doesn't go super fast, and even though I was full speed ahead, they were gaining on us. Emerson started to lose it, saying things like, "Who are these guys? What do they want? Why can't they just let us chill on the water?" So I told him to chill out and focused on going straight to the docks. After about 5 minutes, the docks were in sight, but the boat behind us was so close that we could see the bow itself going up and down with the waves. I honestly didn't know what to do. I banged a hard left and got as close to the shore as I could without beaching, and miraculously, the other boat peeled off in the other direction. We breathed sighs of relief, but I still went full speed back to the docks. After docking and being relieved at the fact that there wasn't any damage to the boat, we met up with our friends after that and told them what had happened, and also came up with some theories, like maybe they wanted to rob us, or maybe they wanted to take the boat. We didn't recognize the boat, so they probably weren't from around here. I don't know. I don't like to think about what would have happened. I'm just glad we didn't find out. I do know that I'm thankful for Emerson being there. Without his skepticism, I think things definitely could have taken a turn for the worst. I'm a cemetery operations coordinator, or you can just call me a cemetery manager. Part of my job is sitting down with guests and family members of the deceased to set up funerals, facilitate the sales of plots, etc. A 30-something-year-old man named Antonio, very spiritual man, once sat down with me to purchase a plot for his sick father who was in hospice care. Antonio was a Hispanic man with a very thick accent, and I saw in his eyes he was a very caring man. He showed me pictures of his father, who also looked like a very sweet man, much too young to be taken away from his family. But unfortunately, the man's time came that same week, and Antonio arranged for his father's funeral service at the cemetery. It was a very stormy day, the day of the funeral, which is thought to be a sign of good luck. The funeral procession stopped in front of the front office building briefly. I stepped outside under the front awning of the building and saw Antonio in the car behind the hearse. We waved at each other. Due to the weather, I went back inside until the procession was ready to proceed to the burial site. I got in one of the cemetery pickup trucks and followed the procession to the final stop, where I would stand with my umbrella supervising, as part of my job is making sure funeral services go smoothly. After the funeral, I did some laps around the place in the truck just to survey the area, as I did at least a couple times a day. I had a lot of paperwork to take care of, and on top of this, I had to close the cemetery that night. So a little later, I went back to my desk and took care of this. The cemetery closes at 5:30, so as soon as it started to get dark, I drove around the place one more time to ensure all visitors had left, then drove over to the front gate to shut it. It was a relatively warm early March. The days were still on the shorter side, so by closing time on a normal day, it would already be getting darker. But on this stormy-ass day, it already felt like it was nighttime. I was driving back to my office when I thought I saw someone hurriedly walking down one of the lanes of tombstones before turning behind a hedge and disappearing out of sight. I beeped my horn so as to let them know the place was closed, but strangely enough, I didn't see them again. I grabbed my umbrella and ran out into the rain in that direction. I turned beyond the hedge he turned at and looked down this long row of tombstones on one side and hedges on the other. I didn't see anyone. I looked around in the rain for a solid 20 minutes, but eventually I had to give up. I drove back up to the office and browsed through the CCTV footage. None of it picked up on any unusual movement, even though it was a bit harder to see much because of the storm and it was also pitch black outside now. I tried to multitask, keeping an eye on the camera while finishing up some of my paperwork, when I heard the front door to the visitation room slam shut. I sprang up from my chair and yelled, "Hello?" My first thought was that it was the same person I saw before. Maybe they got locked in the cemetery and were looking for assistance in leaving. I stepped out into the lobby, but no one was there. I looked around and again said, "Hello?" Maybe the door slamming shut was them leaving. I started looking out all the windows, and I stopped when at one of them, I saw someone on the other side, looking back at me, with a blank expression. I jumped back and screamed, and they didn't flinch. I stepped closer and made a squinty-eyed, confused look when I realized I recognized this Hispanic, older-looking man. In my head, it reminded me exactly of the pictures of Antonio's father he showed me. With my heart in my throat, I ran out the front door of the building and to the side where I saw the man, but he was gone. He wasn't booking it into the fields, he wasn't hiding in a bush nearby, he was gone. I looked around me as I stood in the rain getting soaked, then ran back inside, packed up my things, locked up, and got in my car. I opened and closed the gate, once more locking it behind me, and drove home. When my wife asked me at home why I was being so quiet, I just told her, long day at work. To this day, I think I was just overworking myself, and my mind was playing tricks on me, but it still is genuinely disturbing to think about. My name is Jeremy. This was in the dead of October, chilly and windy. I live in a somewhat big town. It's very poor and old, early 18th century type buildings. A friend and I were bored one night and decided to go fuck around at 3 a.m. I know that going out at 3 a.m. in a poor town isn't exactly smart, but we like to have our fun. We got bored of driving around blasting our music. We're both very big metalheads, and at that point we had our own band. So we decided it would be interesting and cool to walk around a cemetery in the town. Behind the old town square, there's a massive cemetery. It's divided by two sides of a highway, both sides taking up about 20 acres of land. As I said, it's massive. We decided to check out the older part of the cemetery. This part is completely separated from the rest of the newer cemetery with an old iron fence and gate. We get to walking around and checking out the cemetery, trying to read the old moss-covered graves, taking pictures, being a little bit disrespectful, I know. But these were graves from at least a century ago, so there was no one living that would be upset by it, and I'm sure the people in the graves didn't mind too much. After about an hour of checking it out, we sit down next to a giant pecan tree in the middle of the old cemetery. That's when we hear this little girl laughing. It was really close to us. At first I assumed maybe it was a toy left on a child's grave or something like that. I'm not one to scare easily, so I just figured it's motion activated or something like that. We are not at all easy to scare, so we both sort of laugh, pointing out that it's creepy and just keep talking and enjoying the ambiance. Then, as in all stories like this, I get the feeling of something or someone watching me. Once again, I just figured that I was letting the entire thing get into my head. Then my friend says he thinks he sees someone in the shadows of a small wooded area right next to the cemetery, of which we were really close. At this point, we're both a little creeped out and decide to get up and leave. And that noise, the exact same noise, played again, and we hear leaves crunching underneath the feet of someone. That's when we booked it. We ran down the hill leading to the old part of the cemetery, down where my car was parked. I've never ran that fast in my life. It sounded like that laughing noise was following us at that point. We both sort of just went into full fight or flight mode at that point, going as fast as we could without thinking. The noises behind us stopped as we got to my car. I started my car and put it in drive, pulling out into the highway without looking. Luckily no one hit us. We get down the road to the only gas station that's open at this time of night to check in the back of my car. We had both been discussing how we were scared some shit had been done to it. We get around to check and immediately find the back door is open. I know for a fact neither of us ever opened it. There was no reason for us to open it. I look in the back seats, make sure nothing's there, get right back in the car and peel out. I'm still confused about what happened that night. I'm not sure if we both overreacted or what. All I know is that I still feel that weird feeling that something is behind you whenever I tell this story. When I was 19, my friend Sean, who was a big goofball, came over to chill in our basement as he often would during the summer. I remember he had a Coke bottle in his hand and I was eating Wendy's when he said we should check out that creepy little cemetery across town. It was the most random idea ever, and I even told him that. Still, we had no school the next day, and I knew exactly which cemetery he was talking about. I don't know if one should even call it a regular cemetery. It's just a small plot of land with maybe 100 tombstones at most. The tombstone's very archaic looking, and any time we'd pass, There would be no signs of anyone having come to visit within the last decade. The site probably dated back centuries, and it had this super creepy vibe to it because it was closed off by a gothic metal fence, and it was surrounded by woods on two sides, the road on one, and some old abandoned building on the other. Everything about it just gave scary vibes. It took a little persuading, but Sean managed to get me to want to check it out too. Ironically, it was a very cloudy, wettish kind of day, I guess conveniently adding to the mood. Sean pulled up his Honda to the side of the road. I told him to pull up more so it wasn't obvious. This was a low traffic road, so it would look kind of suspicious. He pulled up a few hundred feet down the road, and we got out and cut through the woods so that any potential passing traffic wouldn't see us entering the little cemetery. Hopping the fence in the woods was easy. It was maybe a 3 or 4 foot fence. Sean kind of took the lead on this since it was mainly his venture. He led us through the eerie little plot of land, and we looked at the archaic tombstones. They all seemed to be from the 19th century. The writing on some of them was illegible at that point. I know it sounds super dumb and cliche, but I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched constantly. I started looking around the surrounding woods. I told Sean how creepy this was. "I know," he replied. Still, with the feeling of being watched, I looked at the abandoned building next to the cemetery, at one of the windows. For a brief moment, I knew I saw someone standing at the window, even through the fog, smudge, and dirt on the glass, but they casually either ducked or walked away from the window. I told Sean we were being watched by someone in that building, and he turned to look at it as well. Then he went to look for the entrance to it. I told him don't. I said we should just leave before we get in trouble. I stayed still by the tombstone he was looking at while he walked around the building, and then he found a way in. He called me over, but I stayed put. Then I heard some loud kind of crack, so I looked in that direction, and there was this older man, probably around 55. Gray hair, had on a black raincoat, I believe he was wearing jeans, and he had a mustache, but that's all I really got of him. Then he opened his mouth and screamed, not just yelled, he screamed, "Get out." He screamed it so loud I thought I saw birds fly away from being startled. And just like that, I started to feel lightheaded, and suddenly everything went dark. The next thing I remember was waking up to being dragged in the woods. I freaked out thinking I was being kidnapped, but when I turned and got up, I saw it was just Sean. Sean was freaking out about something. He told me to follow him and run back to the car, so I didn't ask questions. As we ran through the woods, I heard something close behind me, and when I turned, I realized we were being followed by someone, so I ran even faster. We got to his Honda, and he basically put it in drive before the car even had a chance to fully start. When Sean was inside that abandoned building, he found a sigil of Baphomet painted on the wood floor, which is basically the sign of Satan. Around it were a bunch of freaky dolls with buttons for eyes. He didn't get to see anything else in the building, because he heard the old man scream at me outside. He came running to find me passed out on the floor, and he saw the old man slowly walking over to me. He started to drag me away from the old man and into the woods. He actually literally picked me up and threw me over the fence to get me out. I quickly came back to consciousness, and that's when we ran. I had only fainted one time in my life, and it was at that moment. I don't know why I fainted, but it happening at a graveyard with some kind of satanic ritual building right next to it makes it that much stranger. My grandpa passed away a few years ago. I was always very close with him. This past July, on his birthday, I paid him a visit at the cemetery. The cemetery he and my grandma chose to be buried at was about an hour drive from my apartment. My family lived closer, so they all went to his grave together. I had to go separately. It was a rainy, depressing day, and there's nothing worse than visiting a cemetery on a gloomy day. The gatekeeper of the gate asked for the plot number. I gave it to him and he let me in. It's a pretty big cemetery, and I'd only been there a couple other times. Not as the driver though, so I had a hard time finding it. I didn't see many other people, if any, at the cemetery that day,
I'm sure the weather had something to do with it. Eventually, I found his stone and parked my car in the grass to the side. I put some flowers down under his stone, stood there for a while with my eyes closed, and prayed. When I finished my prayer, I opened my eyes and looked up. There was an old man standing about 5 rows of graves down, but directly across from me, and he was looking right at me. I knew this man, though. It was my grandfather. But no, it couldn't be. I rubbed my eyes, and he was gone. Did I just have a spiritual moment? Or were my eyes and mind playing tricks on me? Either way, I got the chills and I had goosebumps. I was quite honestly freaked out. I got back in my car, said, "Love you, Grandpa," and drove off. I felt like I had a headache on my way home. Not sure why. I was the only car on Prospect Road, a quiet road with dense forest on either side. Commonly, there would be deer crossing here. As my car zipped down the road, I spotted someone on the side of the road coming up, which was odd. There were no sidewalks or a walking path on this road. I slowed down, and it couldn't be. It looked like my grandpa again. When I realized this, my heart dropped 1,000 feet, and I swerved the car accidentally. I desperately tried to regain control and come to a stop. Luckily, my car didn't end up in a tree, rather just skidded out in the middle of the road until coming to a halt. I immediately looked back to where I saw him, and I saw a deer on the side of the road, looking at my car. My heart was literally racing. I was terrified. I was not well, and I needed to get home. I made sure no cars were coming and got back in my lane. I focused on the road as best I could given what I had just seen twice. I felt weird the rest of the day. Not sick, but something wasn't right with my head. I went to bed early after watching an episode of my show. I woke up at like 2 in the morning to my phone ringing. It was an unknown number. My heart started racing again. Any call at this hour couldn't be good news. I accepted the call and put the phone up to my ear. There was static on the other end. Finally, I said, "Hello?" More static. But what I thought I heard next, I couldn't believe. Just briefly, for maybe half a second, I thought I heard my grandpa's voice over the static. I tried to say hello again, but I was too shook. Every part of my body was actually shaking. Then the call cut to silence and ended. I called my phone provider the next day to trace the number. They couldn't. They didn't have enough data to trace it apparently, though I don't know if that was just bullshit or not. The events that took place that day and night were the scariest I've ever experienced. Do I think my dead grandpa was trying to contact me? I don't know, because that sounds ridiculous. You'd think if you experienced something like this, you'd be so full of emotion and joy. But no, it still terrifies me, and I really still don't know what to think or how to feel about it. Whether it sounds ridiculous or not, this happened, and I wonder almost every other night, was that really my grandpa on the phone? My friends and I were very stupid when we were teenagers. I was like 17 or 18 when this happened. It was the month of October, and I wanted to do something scary in the spirit of Halloween. There's a small cemetery about 10 minutes from where I live, and when I was drunk with a couple friends, I said we should sneak into it. I'll make up some names for my friends, Ryan and Mike. We were at Ryan's house. He didn't drink ever. So when I came up with the idea, he was the one to drive us to the cemetery. Mike and I were really the ones leading this. Ryan was just along for the ride. But then again, he hadn't been drinking. Ryan parked in some parking lot across the street. It was a ghost town because it was past midnight at that point. We made sure no one was around to see us as we hopped the fence into the cemetery. It wasn't exactly pitch black out, but it was slightly hard to see more than 10 feet in front of us. So we were all using our iPhone flashlights. There didn't appear to be any night security in the cemetery, so we kind of dispersed from each other. Ryan seemed to be following Mike more closely. I could still see where they were because of their flashlights. I went off a little further on my own, and I decided I'd start taking a creepy video. So I started recording with the light still on, of course. I recorded a bunch of old headstones and the general eerie vibe of the cemetery at night. I didn't see Mike and Ryan anymore, so I started to go look for them, still recording. I looked at my phone screen and froze. There was a woman, dressed in a white gown or dress I want to say, with long, gray-looking hair. She was looking down at the ground. I looked up from my phone screen to look at her in person, but she was gone. I started to back away. I looked back at my phone screen, and there she was again. Only now she was looking into the camera, or rather looking at me. I looked up from the phone again and could not see her once more, so I looked back down at the screen again, and there I could see her moving closer to me. I started to scream for Mike and Ryan as I sprinted away from that spot. I couldn't see their lights anywhere, and they weren't answering my screams. I had a feeling they were going to try to scare me, so I ran back for the fence of the cemetery to hop it and get out. I made it to Ryan's car and texted the two of them saying they need to get out of the cemetery now. They met me at the car minutes later. We all sat in the car and I showed them the video I took. They had the same horrified looks on their faces I did. Now that I was actually watching the whole video, I could see the moment the woman slowly lifted her head from looking at the ground to looking at me, and then she starts to move towards me. We could only see her moving for like a second or two before I start screaming in the video and running away. But the way she was moving, we could see no leg movement. It almost seemed as though she were floating to me. I have that video saved on my old iPhone 4S, but the stupid thing won't turn on. It gets stuck at the Apple logo. I don't want to reset that phone until I can get that video off of it somehow. My friends firmly believe the woman in the video was a real, living person who also happened to be in the cemetery that night. But me, having been the one to actually find her, and only being able to see her on my phone screen, well, let's just say I was never a believer in the paranormal until that night.
Number 5. Last night, a friend rushed me out of the house to catch the opening act at a local bar's music night. After a few drinks, I realized my phone wasn't in my pocket. I checked the table we were sitting at the bar, the bathrooms, and after no luck, I used my friend's phone to call mine. After 2 rings, someone answered, gave out a low, raspy giggle, and hung up. They didn't answer again. I eventually gave it up as a lost cause and headed home. I found my phone laying on my nightstand, right where I left it. Number 4. When I was a kid, I was always the last kid to get picked up by the bus driver to go to school. One day I was waiting for the bus by myself, and a bus with no kids pulled up. The bus driver smiled and told me to hop on. I just had a bad feeling. I said, "Where are the other kids?" He said, "We will go get them now. Just get on." He got more and more pushy but didn't do anything crazy. I just kept saying no and he shrugged and left. The real bus pulled up a few minutes later. I went to school and my parents didn't know until I mentioned it that night. Looking back, they were pretty worried. I remember them scrambling to make a few phone calls. Number 3. A few years back, I rented an apartment from a friend of mine. He had recently bought it and had it completely renovated. He put it up for sale but couldn't find a buyer, so I offered to rent it in the meantime. After moving in, I realized there was something wrong with the lady next door. She was about 45 but looked much older. She would sit up all night listening to Christian radio shows and talking loudly to someone. It got to the point where I couldn't sleep, so I went over to her place and asked her to keep it down. She opened the door and I got a quick peek. Her walls all had crosses painted on them in different colors, and words like Jesus and angels scribbled everywhere. The windows were painted black, letting no light in at all. It was damp, yellow-stained 50-year-old carpets, dog shit, and cockroaches everywhere. No dog, though. I asked her to please keep it down. She just looked at me and shut the door. then she turned up the radio even louder. The next night I had my girlfriend staying over. I wake up in the middle of the night and see a shadow of a person next to the bed, looking at us sleeping. I think I'm hallucinating, as I usually do in the dark when I'm sleepy, but then the shadow starts talking. It's my neighbor and she's holding something in her hand. She broke in during the night and who knows how long she stood there. "You should lock your doors at night," she says and walks out. The next morning I hear someone making strange noises below my bedroom window. It's my neighbor talking to herself in tongue. She has a plastic bag in her hand with her rotting dead dog inside. It's hot as hell outside and I can smell death from that bag. At this point I'm scared shitless. She's obviously very insane. I go upstairs and knock on another person's door and ask them what the hell is going on. The guy is as scared as me. Apparently she broke into his apartment one evening as well while he was watching TV with his kids. He got up from the couch to get a snack, only to find her behind the couch, staring at him holding a power drill. Come to think about it, now I know what was in her hand. At this stage, I'm basically shitting myself. I call the cops and they know all about her. Apparently she's a violent schizophrenic and she hasn't taken her meds, but they can't force her or enter her apartment without her permission because she owns it. The only thing they can do is get her when she goes outside. I sit up for the next 2 days waiting for her to run out of cigarettes. When I hear her leave at 2 a.m. to go across the road to the 7-Eleven, I call the cops. They have 3 cars and a special van over in less than 2 minutes. They restrain her and throw her in the van and drive off to some institution, and in less than a minute, it's like she was never there. I never see her again. Still have nightmares about her looking at me in my sleep. Number 2. I was about 15 minutes from finishing the night shift at work when there was a massive crash on one of the windows in the office, so I get up and go check it out. Someone has thrown quite a sizable rock through one of the windows on the front of the building. This is made especially weird because I'm working in the industrial district at 11:30 at night with none of the other businesses open. I go back to my desk, put a quick call through to security to let them know and decide to head home. As I'm leaving the building, I'm freaking myself out about it more and more and end up running to my car, getting in and taking off. I'm almost home and I've started to calm down a bit when I realize that I didn't unlock my car when I got in. It had been unlocked the whole time. I do a quick check with my hand in the back seat for any possible murderers that might be hanging around there, but there's nothing there. Fast forward about 30 minutes. I've called a friend of mine who says he's out drinking, so I decide I'm going to join him. I jump on my bicycle and start riding over. I'm doodling along the road on my bike. It's a nice night and I'm in no big rush, just enjoying the moonlight when I hear someone riding behind me. I straighten up and stick to one side of the road. He passes me really slowly and when he's right beside me, he shoots me a smile and I can describe it as purely insane. I kind of flinch and am taken aback as he rides on. That's when I realize he's riding my mom's bike. Needless to say, I sprint the hell home. When I get there, sure enough, her bike is missing and one of my car's doors is open, the back left one. I was driving and had no need to open that door. Number 1. I worked at a campground on night shift, 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. every night. It wasn't bad. I would bring in my PS2 and game a good portion of the night, only having to deal with 1 or 2 people on busy nights. It was just me in this little 8-foot by 8-foot shack, with nothing around but dark all night. My first week there, the other third shift guy who was quitting told me about this payphone a few feet from the shack where I worked. He said it rang every night at 4:17 a.m., just once. It was probably just an automated test call, he guessed. He's never answered it himself. I go for a few months with the job. It was the middle of the summer, so most nights I had the windows closed, so I couldn't hear the payphone go off. Mid-August, I started leaving the windows open during the night. Sure enough, at 4:17 a.m. every morning, the phone would ring once. The ring even sounded creepy, like the payphone was submerged in water and then put where it sat. One night I got up the nerve to answer it. I set an alarm at 4:15 and would go wait at the phone until it rang. When it did, I answered it, but there was no sound, just dead air, like someone was on the other line but wasn't answering. I said hello a few times and hung up. I did this every night for a week with the same results. I didn't think anything of it and left it alone after that for about a month. The first week of October, I decided to answer the phone once again. I set my alarm, and when the time came, I answered the phone. I repeatedly said hello into the phone. Then I heard what sounded like someone inhaling through clenched teeth. The voice that sounded was rough and sounded like he had gargled gravel. He said my name, my complete name, first, middle, and last. It was a voice I've never heard. My voice caught in my throat and I hung up. I rattled some change into the payphone and hit star 69. The number had come from California. I lived in Indiana.
My partner and I got a breaking and entering call late one Friday night. I'd never responded to a call like that before, but it sounded serious. A young woman was home alone and heard footsteps downstairs, but when she was on the 911 call, the call was cut before she could give her location in the house. We arrived to the home and entered through the front door, which was left unlocked, which later proved to be how the break-in occurred. Both of us shouted police with our guns drawn, expecting the suspect to be armed. We called out for Anna, that was the homeowner's name. Anna never called back to us. We knew she must have been scared and didn't want to give away her position to the intruder. We checked the whole first floor, which was small and quick. There didn't appear to be a basement. A door shutting upstairs drew my partner and I's attention. I led the way upstairs. All the doors had been shut, so I couldn't really tell which door I had just heard. I told my partner to check that one while I checked this one. I turned the doorknob and kicked the door open, immediately lifting my gun into the air. It was a dark, empty room. I heard breathing in this room, though. It sounded like a woman's breathing. I looked at the closet door, which was slid slightly open, and I saw half a face, mostly someone's eye, peeking through the opening. Resting assured it was Anna, I lowered my gun and said, "Anna, it's okay, you can come out." But she didn't, and the breathing quieted. Then my partner in the next room over called, "Jason, I found her." My feeling in that room suddenly went from at ease to ready to throw up. I raised my gun again and yelled, "Come out of the closet." They did not obey, so I called my partner into the room. He turned on the light and we opened the closet together to see this disheveled, drugged out woman holding one of Anna's kitchen knives. With 2 guns pointed at her, she dropped the knife and we brought her into the precinct. Thank God I was stationed in a safer area of town the next year, and I haven't gotten any breaking and entering calls since then. As a state trooper for 15 years, I've experienced my share of close calls and uncomfortable situations. This happened over a decade ago when I was still relatively new to the job. I was on night patrol on an interstate about 2:30 a.m. I usually had my car parked near a bush to hide myself from view from oncoming speeding cars, but at this hour I didn't really try to hide too much. I was moving my car and pulled into a gas station that sat on the side of the interstate. It was closed, not because it was late, but rather it was temporarily out of service. I noticed 2 cars parked in the lot next to each other. There was nothing immediately suspicious about this, but I kept my eye out just because strange things happen at this hour. I parked my car in a way that I could watch the interstate as well as these 2 parked cars. I realized that I didn't see anyone in either of those cars though. Now this was quite suspicious. The station was closed and there were no workers here. I exited my car with my hands on my belt and approached the 2 cars. I tapped on the windows for the both of them. Nobody in either of them as I suspected. I began to walk around the lot as the occasional car zipped down the interstate. I went up to the glass of the closed gas station and knocked on it. I turned around, dumbfounded. Whose cars were these? Just as I imagined they could be in the woods somewhere, I heard someone running from around the building and ask for my help. He was some young 20-something-year-old man, like me at the time. He said his car wouldn't start and needed help. Now, I told him right away that I was no mechanic and that he'd need to call a towing company, but he practically begged me to just check under the hood for a second. He ran to his driver's side and popped the hood. I looked under the hood with him, not really knowing what to look for because I wasn't much of a car guy at the time. I asked if his battery died, and when I looked at him, I took note that he was looking around very oddly. He replied, "I don't think so." I then looked at the car parked next to him. "Whose car is that?" I asked him. He said he didn't know. He simply parked there to see if there was a porta potty in the back or something. I was reading through this kid's bullshit. Something was up here. As I looked back at the guy from the two cars, I saw him looking back at something or someone. I turned and saw another guy approaching me with a knife in his hand. I unholstered my gun and aimed it at him. He dropped the knife and put his hands up. They both did. I immediately called for backup while keeping the two at gunpoint. I cuffed the one who was holding the knife and placed him in the back of my car, and then grabbed the second pair from my glove box and cuffed the second guy. When backup arrived, I went to the back of the gas station where the first guy had originally approached me from. What I found there still holds up to be the most disturbing thing I'd ever seen in all of my years as a trooper. There were two fresh, dead bodies wrapped in garbage bags, cut up in 2 pieces each to fit in the bags. Along with them was also a shovel sitting on the concrete by the woods. The two were planning on burying the bodies somewhere in the woods off the interstate, and it seemed they were in a hurry. These two were a couple of the dumbest people I had ever interacted with, being that out of anywhere in the state, they chose to bury 2 bodies off an interstate behind a gas station. Going to sleep at night knowing you almost had your throat slit by somebody on the job messes with you, and I didn't get much sleep for a while. I'm a rookie cop currently working the night shift. I'm just a normal patrol officer conducting traffic stops and responding to basic 911 calls. 2 nights in a row last week, I was called to the same house. Dispatch had called me to check out the house as someone had dialed 911 and hung up. The house was a couple miles from me, in my patrol zone. I arrived to the house quickly and turned up the dirt driveway through the trees onto the property. The house was dark, no lights on, no cars, nothing. I parked my squad car on the far right side of the property and went to the front door, taking note that all the windows were properly shut. I knocked on the door and no answer. The door was also locked. For my immediate guess, the place was abandoned, for years by the looks of it. I called to dispatch that the place was abandoned and nobody was there. Then I left. The next night I was working the same shift, and around a similar time, I got a call from dispatch that there was another 911 call from the same house. Only this time, someone could be heard crying on the other end before the call ended. I was asked to check out the house again. This time I was a little further away, but still the drive wasn't too bad. I pulled up the dirt driveway again onto the property, and again, no lights, no cars. I approached the front door again, and this time it was left cracked open. I knocked on the door while holding the doorknob to prevent the door from pushing open. No answer. I called to dispatch that I would be entering the house, which I was cleared to do since the crying over the line implied an urgent situation inside the house. I drew my gun and entered the house. I tried to find a light switch without luck. I had my gun in one hand and now my flashlight in the other. The house was mostly silent, besides the sound coming from behind a closed door. It was the basement door. I called to dispatch for backup in a whisper. The sound coming from down in that basement was a tone, like a dial tone of a phone. I started walking down the stairs as quietly as possible. I got to the bottom and followed the noise of the dial tone to an old, early 2000s style landline speakerphone. The phone was off the hook, and it was playing the dial tone on speakerphone. I put the phone on the hook to silence the noise. It was almost as if it were planned to happen like this. As soon as the phone hit the hook, I heard a muzzled laughing type noise in a far corner of the basement. I turned around, and there was some guy standing opposite me in the basement, with his hand over his mouth, and he appeared to be laughing. But it wasn't this genuine laugh, it was more like a sickly, mentally unstable laugh. The guy was holding something in his other hand. I couldn't see what it was at first, but when he raised his hand up to his head, I realized he was holding a revolver. I aimed my gun at him and yelled to drop the weapon. He paused as he had his revolver to his head, apparently about to pull the trigger, so I shot him in the arm twice, causing him to drop the gun. He screamed in pain as I cuffed him and brought him upstairs. I requested a medical team at once. A second squad car pulled up, as did an ambulance a few minutes later. The scariest part about this for me was not that I had to shoot a man in the arm twice, but that I was mere seconds away from seeing a man spray his brains out onto the wall. My partner and I got a radio call of a welfare check, which is just a check on the welfare of a person. A woman's ex-boyfriend called because he received text from his ex stating that she wished it had never ended and that she could no longer go on without him. We get to the place, knock, pound, etc. No answer. We call the number the ex provided and get an answer and a hang-up, so we hear it from the outside window and know she's in there. We say we're going to break the door down if she doesn't answer. We hear some slurred mess of speech. Door unlocks but doesn't open. We open the door to find a young woman, wet, naked, pale as hell, and swaying in one spot. Her hands bleeding. We call a rescue ambulance and she's off to the hospital. Now to the creepy part. None of the lights would turn on, so we conduct a safety search and find candles lit in the bedroom and bathroom. On the walls were Bible scriptures written in her blood and a tub of brown water, the water being mixed with old blood. I don't know how she survived because that water was dark. She had been sitting in it for approximately 3 to 4 hours. Before getting transferred to a different county, I used to work as a police officer in Burlington, New Jersey. Burlington is not a safe place. They say that crime there is 88% higher than the rest of Jersey. And having worked there for a year, I got to learn that firsthand. Now there would be a lot of break-ins, robberies, assaults, and after a while you'd get used to those calls. Sometimes you'd get pretty strange, unsettling calls though. This was one of them. Most Burlington locals are familiar with the McNeil Mansion, a long abandoned mansion that sits right on the Delaware River. The home was constructed in 1894 to serve as a residence for Andrew H. McNeil, as well as his wife and 4 daughters. The house had been abandoned and left to decay since 1974 and is now owned by the county. Sometimes there would be kids trespassing on the property to check it out. Sometime past midnight, I was told over the radio by dispatch to investigate the property, as there was a report by a neighboring house that there were some people seen hopping the fence to the property. Upon entering the property, I noticed a light coming from inside one of the upstairs windows. Part of me inside died a little as I realized someone was in there and that it was my job to go in and get them out. I requested backup into my radio and stated I would be entering the mansion to pursue a trespasser. I scanned the outside of the house once more looking for an entry point and found one of the lower windows was smashed open and easily accessible, and that's how I made my way in. Right away, first thing I did was make my presence as a police officer known. I was inside what appeared to once be the living room of the mansion, rubble covering the whole floor. I heard footsteps upstairs. I shouted again, expecting them to come down the stairs. When they didn't, that meant it was my job to come up. I went up the stairway and started walking around. There was no way to hide my steps with all the litter and rubble on the ground. I heard something fall in a nearby room. This is when the worry and fear really started to kick in. At this point, I had my hand on my gun holster ready to react. Though let me tell you, having a gun doesn't make you feel invincible. I shouted again to try and draw out the trespassers from the room. You ever hear that dumb, overused quote, "I didn't sign up for this" in the movies? Well, I was pretty much feeling that exact way. I stepped into the room that I thought was where the noise had echoed from. It was some small, weird room with a bunch of windows with blurred glass film. There was a sliding closet door open about 3/4, so they had to be in there. I took out my pepper spray and gave one more warning that I was a police officer before yanking the closet open fully. It was empty. This made no sense. I looked around the room and the windows. They looked to an outside deck, and there was someone standing behind one of them. I couldn't see anything about their features other than the outline of their body, but then I realized there were people at the other windows too. The way they were all looking at me through the window film, such a ghostly appearance they gave, like a picture from a kid's horror novel. I found the door to that deck in an adjacent room. When I stepped out, the three figures standing at the windows were gone. I didn't see any other way off the deck besides the door I came out through. I saw the flashing lights of a police car through a bunch of trees, parked on the same lot as me. Another officer announced his and his partner's arrival to me over the radio. I met the officers outside the house and pointed up at the deck where I saw three people standing. They were creeped out as well when I described how they all just stood there at their own windows looking in. We searched the whole mansion together. I eventually came to a small room with a window on the first floor, and once again, something was outside this window. I had to step closer to figure out if it was a person's head or not. When I got too close, the object lowered below the window. I radioed the other officers to go outside with me. We looked around the whole property and didn't find anyone. We searched for another 10-15 minutes before closing up all the entrances to the house and moving on. The scariest part of this for me was definitely seeing three ghost-like silhouettes all standing at their own of the three windows to that deck, looking inside at me.
I'm 30 years old, and I share a house with my sister. It's a 2-floor house, a mother-daughter house, meaning it has 2 kitchens. My sister takes the downstairs, I take the upstairs. My sister isn't home a lot because she often stays with her boyfriend who lives 20 miles away. Like I said, I'm 30. I shouldn't let being home alone ever freak me out. But, admittedly, sometimes it does. This happened on a night that I was home alone in my living room watching a scary movie. My part of the house is an open layout, so the living room, dining room, and kitchen are all one big space. My couch is in the middle of the space, so as I watch TV on the couch, my back is to a large part of the room behind me. So for those a little more easily spooked, it wouldn't be the most comfortable place to be sitting alone watching a scary movie. I'll admit, as I watched in the dark room with nothing but the light from the TV to cancel the darkness of the room, I found myself glancing over my shoulder a lot. I like to think I'm not the only 30-year-old male that does that. But anyway, after the movie, I brushed my teeth, turned off all the lights in the house, then went to sleep. My sleep lasted for about 2 hours. I woke up around 1 a.m., and I wasn't sure why I woke up at first. Then I heard a voice downstairs. It sounded like my sister. It sounded like she was inside the house, so it's not like she was calling for me to open the door. But still, I knew it was my sister's voice. I didn't know what she was yelling up to me though, but I was still groggy and not thinking straight. All I could think was that she must have been calling for me, or arguing with her boyfriend. So I got out of bed and went into the pitch black hall. I turned on the hallway lights and then made my way through the living room and heard my sister's voice again from downstairs. Now I could understand her to be saying my name. I made my way downstairs in the dark, yelling back at her, "What is it?" I looked for the light switch in the foyer downstairs, but couldn't find it. I'm not lying when I say I was groggy as hell. I walked down her little hallway towards her kitchen, find a light switch, and flick it on. The light in the kitchen lights up her little apartment, including her living room. The light starts off dim and needs time to brighten up, but I still saw that there was no one down there. Not her, not her boyfriend. I went to her bedroom, but it was empty. I called her name really loudly one time. No one called back, but shortly after I yelled, I heard something drop to the floor in my sister's bedroom, which I had just checked, and it was empty. I went back up the stairs like a little kid and went back to my bed to where my phone was. I tried to call her a few times, but she didn't pick up. I had myself locked in my room, wondering if I had just hallucinated all of that. Eventually I fell asleep, and in the morning I woke up to text from my sister asking why I called her at 1 a.m. I asked her if she was home last night, and she told me no, she was currently staying at her boyfriend's house. I went downstairs to her bedroom to see what may have fallen down on the floor, but there was not a single object on the floor that could have made that noise. I'm led to believe I hallucinated everything I heard that night, but that's what I want to believe, because the alternative would be much more horrific. But I've never really hallucinated anything else, or had any kind of sleep disorders, so how vividly I heard my sister's voice, and that sound in her room, really freaks me out. I was left home alone a lot as a kid, just due to the fact that my mom was single for a good chunk of my upbringing, and she worked as an RN on a crappy RN schedule, and my brother went away to college. This was a night that my mom was working an overnight. It was a weekend night, so I had this girl Molly over who I was talking to, and she hung out for a while. We watched a couple movies and whatnot, and eventually she had to go home because her parents don't like her out late, so I was left alone to hold down the fort. I continued to watch TV in my room and bed. My bedroom is upstairs next to the backyard, so when someone dragged one of the chairs on the deck outside, I heard it. I got up and looked out the window, and I saw someone sitting on one of the deck chairs down below. I called Molly's name thinking it was her. After all, she'd only left under 10 minutes ago. Whoever it was looked up at me, but it wasn't Molly. I immediately pulled away from the window to hide. That was not anybody I recognized. Not in the darkness, at least. I texted a few close friends in our group chat if it was one of them messing with me. The ones who answered all said no, and asked what I was talking about. I didn't really believe any of my friends would come to my house to mess with me like that anyway. Scared shitless, but still curious, I slowly walked back over to the window to look down again, and that person was still sitting in the chair, looking up at my window. It was a he, that much was clear, and he definitely saw me. I hurried away from the window again to turn off the TV. I sat in my bed in a ball basically, with my arms wrapped around my knees. I waited in darkness for a while. I didn't even want to turn my phone screen on because I was scared he'd see the light. I didn't even want to move because the window was opened and I feared that he'd hear any movement I made. I wanted him to assume I was just no longer in the bedroom. I waited enough time. It had to be a solid 5 minutes of just sitting there. I highly doubted that man outside could still be there. I finally mustered up the courage to get up and look out the window. I felt a little part of me die inside when I saw he was still down there, looking up at my window. Instead of running away from the window again, I tried to be brave and said down to him, "What do you want?" I then noticed his shoulders started to go up and down as if he were laughing really hard, but he didn't make any kind of audible laughing sounds at first, till I heard a slight whistling sound coming from him. It seemed like he was laughing so hard that he was wheezing. I asked him to please go away, then walked away from the window again. I went back to my bed. I was scared to call the police for some reason. I left my room and sat at the top of the stairway listening. The back door was being pushed. He was trying to get into the house. I ran back to my room to hide again. I was 14, I didn't know what else to do. Eventually I heard the front door's doorknob being fiddled with, and the man trying to push the front door open as well. He gave up quickly, thank God. I closed my bedroom window and curtains. If our doors weren't locked, I could have been killed easily. I was skinny and weak when I was 14 and definitely not a fighter. I didn't leave my room again that night until my mom got home around 9. I told her what happened, and her reaction was angry at me for not calling 911, and in hindsight that was very stupid of me. One of the many things I did, or rather didn't do at a young age, that I questioned greatly. This was the story of how I almost died as a young kid home alone, and possibly the most intense night of my life with way too much going on. We're a family of 5. I was 10 at the time. My older brother was 14, my little sister was 5. It was a Friday night. My brother was out with his friends causing trouble clearly, because a dreaded phone call came to my parents. All I remember was I was in my room playing a Star Wars video game when I heard my mom start freaking out crying. I got really scared and hurried to see what was wrong. My mom was on the phone with the hospital,
calling to inform my parents that my brother had gotten hit by a car. Obviously, we were all shaken and really scared. My brother's leg was broken, but I don't know what else was said on the phone. All I know is my parents hurried to get their coats on and got my little sister from her room and asked me if I was okay to stay home alone. I said yes, and they hurried out to the car and left. I was of course really worried for my brother, but I really didn't want to go to the hospital and see him in any kind of bad condition. I don't think my parents wanted me or my sister to either, but they didn't want to leave my 5-year-old sister home without them. It's worth mentioning my brother recovered just fine, as his injury is no longer relevant to the story, other than it being the reason why I was left home alone on a Friday night. Before my dad left, he was trying to calm down my mom, telling her he was going to be okay. So seeing my dad like that made me feel better. I had a feeling my mom was just being overdramatic like any mom would be. I continued playing the Star Wars game for a couple more hours, when I heard the front door open. I had my bedroom door closed. By this point, it was easily past midnight and past my bedtime, so I turned off the TV and PlayStation and crawled into my bed with my Game Boy. I tried listening to hear my parents' voices, maybe hear if my brother was with them or just hear what they were saying, but I didn't hear anything. After a few minutes of not hearing them even come up the stairs, I had a feeling something was wrong. I went to my door and quietly opened it, then walked over to the ledge and banister that overlooked the living room. The lights were off, but there were 3 tall people standing in my living room. They weren't my family. I was so petrified that I was frozen for a second before I could quietly walk back into my room and shut the door as quietly as I could in my trepidation. But it wasn't quiet enough, and I knew it. They had to have heard the door click shut, even if just slightly. I hurried to my closet door, opened it quietly, stepped inside, then shut the door. I had myself sitting behind a bunch of the boxes and bags of clothes that were stuffed in my closet. I was actually pretty covered from view. There was this short period that felt like forever that I was anticipating my bedroom door open, and it did. And at that moment, I knew I was going to die. I heard footsteps walk into the room. I couldn't tell how many people. It may have been 1, it may have been 2. I heard the footsteps move to my bed. Then I heard my covers being played with. Then silence. Then more footsteps towards the closet door. Then silence for a few seconds. And then the closet door opened. My heart was in my throat by this point. All I did was sit quietly and hold my breath. The door was open for a really long time, but I didn't look up. I didn't move. It had to be a good 20 seconds of silence before the door closed again. Footsteps walked away from the door, then out of the room. I finally looked up, and I just realized, from where I was crouched down behind the bags and boxes, I may have been visible to that person. It wasn't until probably an hour that I heard my parents return. I ran downstairs to them. The front door was left ajar by the people who broke in, and they had stolen a number of valuables from our house. It was a night that just went from bad to worse for our family. My parents were in such a rush when they left for the hospital that they apparently didn't even lock the door. I was lucky to have not been killed or kidnapped. I look back now and really wonder if the person who opened the closet and just stood there for 20 seconds saw me hiding in there. Maybe he was just a guy that came to rob a house, not to kidnap or hurt a child. Or maybe he just didn't see me, and I just narrowly escaped death or injury. I was home alone for an entire week one time when I was still a teenager living with my parents, which was a rare occasion since my parents don't go out a lot. My mom's rich friend Patty invited my parents on a trip that she was paying for. I'm an only child, so I was left alone in the house. We lived in Newark, Ohio, which is in Licking County. Yes, our county was actually called Licking County. My parents' old house had woods in the backyard and was on some quiet road that only a few cars would pass per day usually. We had a huge deck in the backyard overlooking the woods, and a decently large backyard. We even had a little fish pond and above-ground swimming pool. This was on a Thursday night. I remember because I had conversations with friends about plans for the weekend that day. This was in July of 2013. I was out on the deck smoking weed with my speaker playing music. That's about the time it started. I thought I heard a voice from out in the woods. I lowered the music and listened for a little bit. It didn't repeat. so I raised it back up. When the music was loud again, I heard a voice from out in the woods again. This time I turned the music off completely and listened for longer. There was a voice calling from the woods again, confirming I wasn't just hearing things. It was a male's voice, saying, "Hey, over here." He was kind of distant, but not too far. The woods were anywhere from 20 to 30 yards away from the deck, and that's where the voice was coming from. I didn't think in a million years it was someone calling out for me though, rather maybe just some kids playing manhunt or something. The voice called out again, "Hey, over here, we need help." This time I realized the voice was too deep to be a kid. And when a voice yells out, "We need help," obviously that'll always be slightly concerning. I was getting a little bit uncomfortable now, because now I was questioning if these yells were directed at me. Now I heard the voice yell, "Straight in front of you, please come help us." And the voice was coming from straight in front of me in the woods. Now I had a feeling this was directed at me. I reluctantly called back, "Who is that?" And they responded, "We just need help, we're stuck in the woods." I called back, "What does that mean?" And the voice replied back, "Just please come help, straight in front of you." I got out from my seat, walked down the steps of the deck onto the grass, and proceeded towards the woods. I called out, "I'm coming, where are you?" The voice replied instantly, "Right in front of you, I see you." I replied back, "Wait, are you alone or with someone?" There was no answer this time. I stopped in my tracks about halfway towards the woods. I had a bad feeling in my gut about this. I started walking backwards, back towards the house and the deck. I didn't even want to turn my back to the woods, because it took me that long to realize there was something very suspicious about this situation. I made it back to the deck, and the voice didn't say anything else. If they truly saw me and this was real, they would have said something like, "Where are you going?" at the very least. They knew I was onto the situation, but who even knows how many people were in there? Could have been one, could have been three. All I know is getting stuck in the woods makes absolutely no sense, especially if he or they were able to literally see me. Like what? Did their shirt get caught on a branch? I went inside the house and locked all the doors just to be safe. I chilled in my living room for a bit, still high, and I think that's why I was more trusting at first, because of how high and relaxed I was. Then though, I heard the voice again from outside, closer now. Definitely in the backyard and not the woods anymore. I heard splashing of water. It could have been the pool or the pond. I hurried to the window to see. I didn't see anyone at first, but then the voice called, "I see you," with a laugh. I noticed him. It was one guy, at least one guy visible. He was hidden behind the pool on the other side, and I could only see his head. It was just too dark to make out anything besides his dark, medium-length hair. I closed the blinds and tried to ignore it. Maybe he'd lose interest if he saw I wasn't entertaining him. He was probably a sick, deranged person who enjoyed messing with people, so I didn't want to give him what he wanted. But my breaking point was when there was a horrible, aggressive banging on the window where I had just closed the blinds, and on the other side, the guy was screaming help. I screamed at the top of my lungs to "Fuck off, you freak, the police are coming." I screamed it over and over, trying to make myself sound crazier than him. I heard him start to laugh on the other side of the glass. His laughing started to fade away as I assume he walked away. I sat back down on the couch, trembling, shaking, out of breath. I sat there for a while, and it seemed like the guy had really given up. I still got a good night's sleep that night because weed helps me sleep. I wonder if I would have handled that situation any differently if I wasn't high though. The situation made me more paranoid about who I opened my door to. I'm 23 years old, and I live at home with my parents still. One day they were both not home, and I was outside playing basketball in the front yard. At some point while I was playing, I looked up at one of our upstairs windows and saw a woman standing there. Not my mom, not my sister. It was a random woman. I guess when she saw me looking at her, she dipped away from the window. When I went inside and upstairs to check the lounge room, She wasn't anywhere. I checked every single room I could, every bedroom, the bathroom, every closet. Then I checked the downstairs, which included the living room, kitchen, dining room, one bedroom, and more closets. Finally, I checked the basement, and I highly doubted she could be down there. It's a small basement with a couple couches, a bar, and 2 closets. There weren't many places for someone to hide, but when I opened the second closet door, I was incredibly scared, as I didn't know of any other places someone could be hiding in the house. This was the last unchecked spot that I could think of. I yanked the door open as if I were ripping off a band-aid, and like I did with the closet before this one, I right away pushed myself into the closet just in case that woman was in there and I'd have the jump on her. But all I pushed myself into was a bunch of coats and coat hangers. I was so confused. I wasn't going to question my sanity though. I definitely saw that woman and I knew it. It wasn't the kind of thing you would just so vividly imagine. I went back to the middle floor and screamed very loud that whoever was in the house needs to get the F out. I actually screamed so loud that our next door neighbor came over and asked if I was okay. I told him that I literally just saw a woman at our upstairs window watching me play basketball. He came in and helped me search again. When we couldn't find her, I was left to assume that she snuck out through the back door, which I did unlock after all when I went to grab the basketball from the yard. So my neighbor left. I locked all the doors, called my parents, and told them the crazy story, and they weren't too thrilled. But they asked me to make sure nothing was stolen. I did just that, and luckily it seemed anything that was worth something was still in place. So now fast forward to that night. I went to sleep after checking the house one more time just for peace of mind. It was hard to fall asleep though. My mind was racing for obvious reasons. Most people can't relate to seeing a stranger at their window inside of their house. But my restlessness helped me out in this situation, and here's why. I was finally starting to drift away slightly. Then I heard some noises from the other side of me. I had the fan on above me, so the room wasn't dead silent, and that's why I didn't immediately turn to my other side at the first sound I heard. But the sound started to sound human-like. I turned to my other side, and there she was, getting out from under my bed. She stood up tall above the bed, and I screamed so loud, louder than earlier before. I jumped out of my bed and tackled her to the floor and had my hand around her throat, asking her who she was. My doorbell rang, my neighbor again. I picked the tall, dirty-looking woman up off the floor and dragged her to the front door with me as she struggled and scratched at me. I still have 2 scars on my right arm from her claws. I opened my front door to my neighbor again, and he let himself in and helped me restrain the woman. This was when I called the police. The whole time we waited for the police, the woman was screaming and cursing at my neighbor and I, threatening us too. The best way to put it, she looked and acted like a meth head currently suffering from withdrawals. When the police arrived, one of the officers knew exactly who the woman was. They had dealt with her multiple times before. Her name was conveniently Karen. It was satisfying to watch her be brought into the back of the police car. I let my neighbor know how grateful I was for him coming so quickly to help. And that night, my mind continued to race. But instead of being completely freaked out, which I still was a little, I felt this overwhelming feeling of satisfaction. And I can't fully explain why.
Immediately go to the nearest room and lock and barricade the door. Stay low and stay quiet.
I went to a somewhat typical high school. Not in a traditional American suburb, but a more rural set high school. Some kids go to schools with graduating classes of like 500 to hell, even 1,000 kids. My high school had, I think, a little less than 200 kids in my graduating class. It was the kind of high school where even if you weren't friends with someone, you still knew them by face and name. Walking down the hallways, you'd know basically 99% of your peers, at least in your own graduating class. Coming from a quiet town, there weren't a lot of crazy news stories really. It was pretty uneventful there. What we did for fun after school was actually go out and play sports and ride our bikes around and stuff like that. This was like 17 years ago though, so I guess things may be a lot different these days for kids. Another thing I always felt that was unique about our school was that there didn't really seem to be any bullying for the most part. Like, at least not the typical cliche movie-style bullying, where kids are getting pushed into lockers or having their lunch money stolen. When I think back now, I can't really name a single kid from my graduating class who could be labeled as a bully. Sure, there were kids who just tease others, but nothing too serious. Of course, there were quiet kids in our grade, like every school has, but there was one kid in my grade who literally never spoke at all. I'm gonna just name him Luke for this story. He wasn't even a weird-looking kid or anything. He seemed pretty nice to people who went out of their way to interact with him. I shared one class with him though. It was an elective that had kids from all 4 grades in it. Luke and I were juniors when this happened. This elective was a computer class, and back when this happened, the computer rooms in our high school were still rocking those big bulky box computers. I remember the layout of this classroom. There was the aisle in the middle separating 2 columns of tables, and the 2 columns had 4 rows each. Each row had 4 seats, and each student had their own computer. This class wasn't full, so there were probably like 26 filled seats out of 32. Luke always sat in the second row in the furthest seat to the left with no one next to him, as everyone else sat with people they knew from their respective grades. Unfortunately, not long into the semester, the seniors in the class started collectively picking on Luke. By this, I mean some of the seniors would make jokes about how quiet Luke was that it was scary when the teacher would ask certain things. For whatever reason, our teacher never stood up for Luke and told them to cut it out. The teacher was a bit of a pushover from what I remember. Maybe that was why. As the semester went on, it got a little worse. I remember at one point seeing a small piece of paper fly from the back row from the seniors right to the back of Luke's head. I remember he turned around and had this very telling look. The seniors continued to make fun, one of them saying, "Wasn't me," and blaming one of the other seniors. The look on Luke's face just looked like a mix of sadness, anger, and just defeatedness. I genuinely felt bad, but I didn't get involved. Eventually, one day I saw Luke sitting on a curb not far from the high school after school ended one day. I passed by him as I was walking to my car. I have an early birthday, so I was driving around halfway through junior year. Given we were in a quiet area, no one was exactly walking distance from school. So I did the right thing and said what's up, and asked if he needed a ride home. His face literally lit up a bit as he said yes. We walked to my car, and from there on, he guided me to his house. It was about a 10-minute drive to his house. We talked a lot during that car ride. I told him he should just ignore the seniors in our computer class. I said they're a bunch of deadbeats anyway. He said they're not the only ones that he's sick of. He implied that he deals with people picking on him in multiple classes, which honestly made me feel pretty terrible for him. In those 10 minutes, I felt like I learned a lot about Luke and got to know him as a person just a bit, and he seemed like a decent kid. As I dropped him off, I made a comment to him about how close we lived, and then we said goodbye. Every day in class after that, we'd say hey to each other, but admittedly, I unfortunately never got involved whenever he got picked on. Well, one day, Luke didn't show up to class. Computer class was 4th period. It wasn't until 7th period English that an announcement came over the loudspeaker saying, "Lockdown, this is not a drill." I remember everyone looking around nervously, and I remember our teacher looking the most nervous. She ran to turn off the lights and told everyone to hurry to one corner of the room. Seeing how nervous our teacher was only made all the students even more nervous. We sat with the lights off for a long time. It had to be 20 to 30 minutes until there was another message on the loudspeaker. It was the principal, explaining that there was someone in a mask carrying a black duffel bag trying to get into the school. Our school had really good security, and when someone spotted that person approaching the school with what could only be assumed to be guns or any kind of weapons in that duffel bag, the doors were all locked. The school day was cut short after that once a few police cars were on the scene. I remember it being a Friday, so I took a few of my friends home to my house so we could hang out. I'd be lying if I said I remember the small details thereafter of that day, but I think it was that same night that I woke up in the middle of the night to light tapping at my window. and I could see someone on the other side of the glass. I started freaking out, and before running to get my dad, I took a closer look and then said, "Who is it?" I heard Luke's voice as he said his name. I felt like my heart dropped a second time. I went over to the window and lifted it just a crack. I said, "What are you doing? How did you find me?" And he said through the window, "I tried to do something bad." And it instantly clicked. I mean it. It instantly clicked in my head that it was him. Before he could even tell me, I said, "Was it you who caused the lockdown?" And he said yes. I was scared to ask him what he was planning on doing. Instead, I asked him how he found me. He admitted to remembering the deli that I said I lived by, and he eventually found my car after biking around the area. That explanation didn't make it any less disturbing. Luke asked me if he could come in and talk about what he planned on doing, and I said no, I cannot let him in, nor can I hear what he planned on doing. I actually recommended he go to the school and confess to whatever he was going to do, and when he refused to walk away from my window, I said "Dad" really loudly, which worked in scaring him off. I went to my parents' room and woke them up to tell them. My mom was the one who insisted on calling the police. She was distraught. When a police officer eventually came, I had no choice but to tell the truth. I gave Luke's identity, and I explained that he had just come to my window, admitting to potentially almost doing something horrible at the school. Obviously, the police were already aware of the lockdown, so I believe police were sent to his house that night, but after speaking with Luke's parents, they realized Luke wasn't there. I believe it was the next day that Luke was either found or he just returned home and police were still waiting there, and he confessed to what he told me. As far as our graduating class knew, Luke was charged with something like making a terroristic threat. I know he did time, and I know he's been out a long time. To be honest, I don't really know if he's still around. Part of me always wanted to feel bad for Luke, witnessing how loneliness and getting picked on can probably eat away at someone. He followed me and came to me simply because I showed him an act of kindness, something I unfortunately believe nobody else showed him. Still, the fact that he admitted to bringing a gun to school with a mask on, even if he didn't admit to intending on carrying out the implied threat, I can't fully believe he simply came to the school with a gun just to scare people. I think he for a split second had a horrible plan and got cold feet and regretted it. I just hope Luke eventually got the help he needed.
This happened in 2016, back when I was in 5th grade. If you remember that year, you probably remember all the killer clown sightings that were happening around the country. At the time, it was all over the news and social media. Most adults thought it was just some dumb trend or prank, but for young kids, it was actually pretty scary. It was a normal day at school. I went to an elementary school in a quiet suburban area where I still live. Nothing weird ever really happens here. It was around 1 p.m. I'm guessing, because it was closer to the end of the school day. We were in class working on some random assignment, and the classroom was quiet except for a few people whispering. Then, one of the students in my class suddenly said out loud, "There's a clown outside." I still remember her high-pitched voice as she said it. Some of us stood up and looked toward the window, and yeah, there really was a clown outside. He was standing just a few feet away from the window, facing our classroom directly. He was wearing a baggy, dirty red and yellow clown suit and had white face paint with black around the eyes. He was smiling and staring in at us with this big fake grin. After a few seconds, he started waving slowly. Some of the kids thought it was funny and laughed. Others were clearly freaked out. Our teacher, Mrs. Riker, walked over to the window, looked at the guy for a second, and then said through the glass, loud and annoyed, "Excuse me, classes are in session, you need to get out of here." The clown didn't react at all. He just kept standing there, smiling and waving. Mrs. Riker told us all to sit back down and said she was calling the front office. She picked up the corded classroom phone and then walked into the hallway with it and spoke quietly. The phones in the classrooms were always next to the door, so that's how she was able to walk outside the room with it. She came back in moments later and then hung up. She walked over to the window and shut all the blinds after she saw that the man in the clown costume was still there, doing the same creepy waving motion, smiling, and general clownish mannerisms. Not even 2 minutes later, the principal's voice came over the loudspeaker. "Staff, please get your classrooms into lockdown formation." There was a sense of urgency in the voice that, looking back, was probably to alert the teachers that it wasn't a drill without causing all the kids to go into a panic. That's when it got serious. Mrs. Riker rushed to turn off the lights and told us all to get under our desks. She pulled the door shut and locked it. Everyone was quiet. Some kids were giggling, but others looked scared. I was definitely scared. We stayed like that for what felt like forever, but it was actually about 30 minutes. Nobody knew what was happening, but eventually, the principal came back on the loudspeaker and said the lockdown was over and that the situation had been handled. Apparently, school security had confirmed that the clown was gone. They didn't tell us anything else. Classes went on like normal for the rest of the day. It felt weird. Everyone was talking about it during dismissal, but the teachers didn't say much. Then, after school, I was walking home with my friend Chris. We lived in the same neighborhood, just a few blocks away. While we were walking, a couple of 5th grade girls behind us suddenly ran past us, looking panicked. One of them said, "There's someone in the woods." We stopped and turned around. Behind the school, there's a small patch of trees. It's not deep woods or anything, just enough to separate the school from the street behind it. And standing just barely out of view, near the edge of the woods, was the clown again. Same dirty outfit, same painted face. He was half hidden by the trees, but he was clearly waving, and he wasn't just waving at random. He was doing it slowly, directly at the girls who had just passed us, like he was trying to call them over. Chris and I didn't say anything, we just ran. I don't know what happened after that, but I told my parents as soon as I got home. They called the school, and later I heard from another kid that the police were called again and patrolled the area, but they never found anyone. To this day, nobody knows who that guy was, and I don't know if he was just trying to scare some kids or if he were planning something worse. But what freaks me out the most is that he came back after the lockdown, and he waited, hidden in the trees, watching kids go home. So this happened not long ago. I live on the outskirts of Philadelphia, where it's me, my son, and my stepdaughter. I say stepdaughter as I've taken my best friend's daughter in legally. Around 2016, my best friend Joanne was murdered by her husband. He ended up making national headlines and was convicted of 5 more murder cases. He's facing 3 consecutive life sentences with no parole. Now I'm a middle school teacher at my son's school. He's the year below what I teach. My stepdaughter is the grade above what I teach, so their classrooms are not far off from mine. This incident took place on March 30th, 2020, when the lockdowns were slowly taking place. Where I taught, the school was rather distant from anywhere. The next school was about 10 miles, the gas station was about 2 miles, and the nearest park was about 600 meters from where we were. So we were one of the last schools to go into lockdown. Around midday of March, it was a normal heated Monday. I was teaching math at that time for the 6th graders. All of a sudden, I get a notification on my phone that someone was here to pick up my stepdaughter. The system that works is the main emergency number gets a notification if someone is picking up your child. The thing is, my stepdaughter was 3 classes down from me. She had no appointments, no close family that lived in a good radius from us. I replied that I'm here at school and no one in a 10-mile radius is picking her up. This was sending alarm bells off left and right. They said that the person picking her up was her biological dad. The school doesn't have that type of information on file. A few minutes go by on the phone and it's dead silent. The lady tells me she's going to call the principal and see what he wants to do from there. A gut feeling didn't sit right with me. I called my stepdaughter's classroom and asked for her to be sent to my room. Just as I hung up, I was back to teaching when my stepdaughter came into the classroom. Not even 10 minutes later, the lockdown siren went off. I had kids push desks to the door and barricade the windows, and everyone sat in the corner. I had a pretty good feeling on who this lockdown was about. We were in a lockdown for about 46 minutes at this point. My main concern was how did he end up getting out? About 2 hours later, the lockdown was lifted and I was escorted out by the police.
I was further questioned on how I knew this man due to the CPS records. I said I took my best friend's daughter in and explained the whole story. The police informed me that how he had gotten out was a prison bus transporting inmates to another cell, but a car came swerving in and crashed into the prison bus, leaving 10 prisoners dead on the scene, 2 prison guards knocked out, and 20 escaped. There were police already at our house waiting for the dad to show up, but he never did. When they heard the lockdown at the school, they knew it was one of the prisoners. If they had never gotten there on time, I honestly have no idea what would have happened. This happened during my freshman year of high school. I'm 21 now, and I still think about it all the time. I went to a public school in a pretty average suburban town. We did lockdown drills maybe once every couple months, so when this one started, that's exactly what I thought it was, just a drill. It was a Wednesday, 4th period. I remember because it was earth science and we had just finished a pop quiz. I was putting my stuff into my backpack when the loudspeaker came on and said, "This is a lockdown. Lock all doors, lights off, stay quiet." At first, nobody panicked. Our teacher, Mrs. Chen, sighed, got up, and locked the door like usual. She turned off the lights and told us all to get into the corner of the room, away from the door. Everyone was laughing a little and whispering like it was no big deal. But then we heard a second announcement. Same voice, but it sounded different. More rushed. "This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill." That's when the room went silent. My teacher didn't say a word. She just motioned for everyone to stay down and keep quiet. I could tell even she was nervous now. She kept checking her phone, and we could hear faint, distant police sirens outside. A few minutes passed, then we heard something from the hallway. Footsteps. Slow ones, and not in a hurry like a cop or a teacher, just one person walking. They stopped right in front of our classroom. We were all staring at the door. Nobody breathed. Then came a knock. Not loud, just a soft, slow knock, 3 times. Nobody moved. Then the doorknob turned. They tried to open it, but it was locked, obviously, but they kept trying. Not aggressively, just turning the handle back and forth like they were checking. And then, a male's voice on the other side said, "This is just a drill, you can open the door now." We all collectively looked at Mrs. Chen, and then she looked back at all of us, put her finger up to her lips, and shook her head no. The person on the other side of the door kept knocking and trying the doorknob, and eventually the knocks got more aggressive as the voice of the man on the other side kept saying hello. Our classroom was on the first floor in the science wing. I can't tell you how much I was shaking in my shoes. I know even if all the other kids didn't want to admit it, they were as well. Eventually, the knock stopped, and the man must have walked away. We heard nothing after that for a solid 5 minutes. Total silence, apart from the police sirens outside getting louder. It felt like forever. Then, someone down the hall screamed. It was a girl. Just one scream and then nothing. A couple of people in my class started crying quietly. Honestly, it was the girls. Someone whispered that they saw a shadow move past the little glass window on the classroom door on several occasions. Each time anyone spoke, even quietly, Mrs. Chen gave a stern but quiet shh. Another 5 or 10 minutes passed. Then, finally, we heard the sound of police officers shouting from down the hallway, telling everyone to stay in place. They were going room to room, and when they finally knocked on our door and unlocked it with a key, Mrs. Chen didn't even move until they showed their badges. We were all escorted out in a line, past other classes doing the same thing. There were cop cars everywhere outside, even a SWAT van. I didn't see anything too crazy, but I did see one officer leading a guy in cuffs out of the building. He looked about 30. Not a student, pale, long hair, wearing dark clothes. Later that day, we found out that some criminal had slipped into the school through one of the side doors during a delivery. That side door was right by the end of the science wing. Apparently, he was mentally unstable and had something in his backpack, but I don't know if it was a weapon or not. They didn't tell us much. They just said nobody was hurt and everything was under control. But I swear, I'll never forget that knock at the door. The way he turned the handle, the scream down the hall. It didn't feel like everything was under control at all.
I had just started school, and I already had a lockdown to tell. I'm only 15 years old and just started as a sophomore at Northside High School in Jacksonville, North Carolina. That morning, I came to school early, around 6:55 a.m. I was one of the first people in my first period class, which was chorus. Our classroom is at the very end of the fine arts hallway, right next to the auditorium. I was sitting at my seat with my phone out, listening to music and just waiting for the bell to ring and start the day. After a few minutes, I heard my teacher say something, so I paused my music and took out my headphones. When I looked up, I saw my classmates heading into the closet at the back of the choir room. I was confused. We had just practiced a lockdown drill the day before, so I wasn't sure if this was another drill or something else. Still, I listened to what the teacher was saying and followed everyone else into the closet. The teacher shut the door behind us and turned off the lights. We were now sitting in complete darkness, with only a small amount of light coming in from under the door. At this point, I still didn't know what was happening, but then I heard police sirens outside. That's when I started to realize this wasn't a drill, it was real. I started to feel nervous, but I kept calm. I figured if I stayed as composed as I could, maybe I wouldn't panic as much. I sat in that closet quietly, trying to listen for any sounds coming from outside, but I didn't hear anything else. We stayed in that closet with the lights off until the lockdown ended, around 8:45 a.m. That's nearly 2 hours. Once we were let out, I felt calm again because everyone around me had stayed calm too. I went back to my seat in the front of the room and put my music back on, just trying to get back to normal. Later on, I decided to ask my teacher what had happened. I said, "Were there any fights today?" The teacher looked at me seriously and said, "It's much worse." That's when I started to realize something serious had really gone down. I looked out the window and saw cars lined up in the back of the school. At first, I thought it was just regular pickup traffic, but it felt different. In the classroom, some students were trying to get information. Eventually, my friend Jacob told me that someone had been stabbed in the middle of the school, in the rotunda. I didn't know much more than that at the time, but shortly after, my mom texted me asking if I was okay. I told her I was safe and still in my choir class. Some girls in the class had started crying after the lockdown, and that made everything feel even more real. My mom called me next. She told me she had parked her car at the baseball field, along with a bunch of other worried parents trying to find their kids. Eventually, my name was called and I was allowed to leave the school. When I got to the field, I found my mom. She was clearly shaken up, and honestly, so was I. She drove me to the daycare where she worked, and once we got there, both of us went into a quiet room where we cried together. Her co-workers came in to try and comfort us, and I had to go outside to calm down even more. I put my headphones back in and listened to 3 Days Grace just to get my head right again. Later on, we found out exactly what happened. 2 students had been taken to the hospital. One of them died. A teacher had also been slashed by the attacker. In total, 3 people had been hurt that day. I started searching for more information and found the press conference about the incident already posted online. After watching it, my mom took me to Arby's to get something to eat. I hadn't eaten all day. We got our food, then we went to pick up my younger brother from his middle school. He told us he had noticed a lot of cops at the school, but didn't know what had happened. When we got home, I kept searching online for updates. That's when I saw that a 16-year-old had already been charged with voluntary manslaughter, assault with a deadly weapon, and a list of other serious charges. 2 more students, one 15 and one 16, were also charged with assault and disorderly conduct. What made it even more disturbing was that someone had recorded the stabbing and posted the video on Snapchat. I didn't watch the video myself, but my mom told me about it. She said in the video, the person recording was running, so the phone was pointed at the ground, but you could clearly hear the screams of kids as the stabbing happened. My mom thinks the whole thing might have been gang-related, and after I heard that, I was scared. Scared that someone might come back to retaliate. Another attack, more violence. It's hard to believe that someone actually died. I didn't even know the kid, but I've been thinking about him ever since. I hope he rests in peace.
I grew up in a small town in central Arkansas. Every deer season around November, my family and I would go to our hunting cabin near Mena, Arkansas. My great-grandpa built the cabin in 1984. It was a nice cabin for the time. It's slightly outdated now, but it worked fine for my family and friends and I. 2 years ago, my friends Austin and Cody went with me to the cabin in late October for a pre-season hunt called muzzleload hunting. We were scouting an area about a mile from the cabin looking for any signs of deer because we were considering putting a stand near the spot. After splitting up and wandering around trying to find an area with the best lines of sight for a stand, I came across a pile of rocks in the woods. After closer inspection, I realized it was a grave belonging to a man named Ed Crane. We were not bothered, more interested than anything. We snapped a couple pics, and after finding a decent spot for a stand, we headed back to the cabin. Cody tried doing some research to find anything out about Ed Crane, but he didn't come up with a whole lot. Fast forward 3 weeks, we're back at the cabin for the official modern gun season. This time it's just Austin and I. We were sitting in the cabin discussing where we should go for opening day, and I decided I would try out the stand we had previously put up during muzzleloading season. Austin went about 1.5 miles the other direction towards a small lake off the property to hunt. I left the cabin around 4:45 a.m. because I had about 1.5 miles walk and wanted plenty of time to walk slow and get to the stand before daylight. This isn't a national forest and you cannot drive any vehicles into the hunting trails. We split up at the end of the road, me going left towards the stand and Austin going the opposite direction. It was a normal walk for the most part. I've been in these woods since I was 9 years old, and a mile walk was nothing out of the ordinary. I finished my walk and approached the stand, trying to be quiet as to not scare any deer that are bedding in the area. As the sun slowly started to rise, I couldn't help but keep looking over to my right to see the grave we had previously found. It was around 30 yards from where I was sitting, and it was thinly buried in surrounding brush. There was just enough light to make out the mound of rocks through the leaves. I saw something move out of the left side corner of my vision. This was not frightening at all. I'm completely used to seeing movement early in the morning while hunting. If anything, this was exciting. I turned fully to the left, but I could not locate what I was looking at. There was no movement. About that time, I heard, "Hey," in an almost whisper scream coming from behind me. This made me physically jump so hard that I shook the stand. I flung my head around backwards, but there was nothing there that I could make out. After turning on my headlamp and panning my surrounding area for at least 5 to 6 minutes, I took out my hand radio. While shaking, I radioed to Austin asking if he was near me. I got no response. I continued calling in on the radio, while looking back and forth for the next 20 minutes. Daylight was approaching, and after chalking it up to being in my head, I finally started to calm down. The sun rose up over the trees, burning off the thin layer of fog that was covering the woods. This is around 7 a.m. now. I had almost forgotten about the incident when I heard it again. This time, "Hey Caleb." It was in the same whisper-type scream as before. This time it was enough. I grabbed my bag and gun so fast. I accidentally left the hand radio on the seat beside me in the stand. I climbed down the ladder so fast I almost slipped off. I hit the ground and speed walked all the way back to the cabin, peering over my back every 10 to 20 steps. I opened the cabin door, and Austin was nowhere to be seen. He was still hunting. When Austin finally did return to the cabin, he was confused. He kept asking if that was me screaming into the radio. I explained to him my experience, and I explained I never screamed. His radio was clipped to his belt while he was standing in the doorway trying to make sense of what had happened, and right as we were talking about it, his radio started making this incoherent screeching sound. Not a static sound. It sounded organic, like some kind of animal was making it. We listened intently and sat the radio right beside us for the rest of the day. It never happened again. We came back later that week with our other friend Cody, and I looked for my radio in the stand and on the ground around it. It was nowhere to be found. Needless to say, we no longer hunt in that spot. We don't even hunt anywhere in that direction past the gate. It was the weirdest, most unexplainable experience of my life. It was a cold December night. I was hanging out with a few friends, Todd and Tristan. We were bored and had nothing to do. So one of us came up with the idea of going to the nearby train station platform to take some pictures and goof off. The platform isn't far from our houses. When we got there, we started taking pictures of the liminal space we found ourselves in. After hanging out there for a little while, it started getting even colder and we were hungry. So we started to head to our car. The path back takes us on a long footbridge across a canal. We spent some time on the bridge joking around and taking more pictures. The mood could not have been better, but the cold was getting to us, so we started back on our way again. The bridge was not wide enough for the three of us to walk side to side. I was walking in front, Todd and Tristan behind me. We were joking and chatting as we walked. Tristan said something funny, and I turned, still walking and laughing at what he said, when I noticed a man walking just feet behind Tristan. He looked to be in his late 30s. His face was dirty and he was wearing a black and white plaid shirt and ball cap. His arms were down at his sides. In one hand was a cigarette, and in the other was a large kitchen knife, clear as day. My blood ran cold when I saw it. I quickly spun back around, pretending I hadn't seen him. For some reason I thought that was the best thing to do. My fight or flight kicked in, and I found myself speed walking to the end of the bridge. I hoped that my friends would catch on and match my pace. I glanced back at them to check, and thankfully they were right on my tail. But the man was too. He was now so close that an outsider would have thought he was part of our group. He stepped off the bridge and took a path going to the right, my friends still having no idea the man was even back there. Fearing I was about to need to defend myself, I held my tripod up like an axe. The man seemed to get the memo and took the path to the left. We walked a little bit further before I pointed him out to Todd, and I gave him a quick rundown of the situation we almost found ourselves in. Walking backwards, we watched the man disappear into the darkness, and we hurried back to the car. We drove to the nearest gas station where we got food and talked it over. The whole situation was just a weird story, up until a few days ago when I was checking the pictures I had taken that night. This picture shows Todd under a light on the station platform, but just beyond the light, almost behind a freight car, is the silhouette of the man. The picture was taken at least 30 minutes before the situation on the bridge, meaning he was watching us, waiting for us to put the cameras down and turn our backs. You hear stories of things like this happening, but you never expect it to happen to you. I still get chills thinking about how differently it could have gone. My husband was in the military, and after we got married, we bought a house in a small town in North Carolina. Despite being considered a military town, it really was not a safe area to be in. One night we even heard gunshots down the street from us. But anyway, because of his job, he was gone for training operations often, and he also worked nights when he wasn't having to travel. This meant I was home alone most of the time. At the time of this story, I was in college full-time, so I was able to fill my days with lots of studying and homework to pass the time he wasn't home. One night when I was writing an essay, I was laying in bed with our dog Simba, and we both heard what sounded like rustling coming from above our heads. Simba started barking and growling, which is unusual for him. He's a pit bull mix, and despite people thinking they're scary dogs, he is a huge baby and had never acted like this before. I thought it was mice, so I texted my husband and he agreed. He told me he'd call pest control the following day so I wouldn't have to worry about laying bait and traps myself. 2 days later, pest control came and did what I thought was a thorough inspection of the house. There was some evidence of mice and roaches in the attic, so he laid some baits and also sealed some entry points in our home. However, over the next week, the rustling kept getting worse and worse, and was always at nighttime. And every time I would hear it, Simba would freak out, and at one point his hair was literally standing up on his back. This started to really freak me out, so when I called my husband after this happened, he assured me that it was the mice and they were just freaking Simba out. Later that night, just as I was about to fall asleep, I thought I heard footsteps from above. But since my dog didn't hear it, I thought I was just psyching myself out. Being home alone so often, I did have some anxiety, especially at nighttime, because I didn't feel safe without my husband home. The next day I slept in pretty late and had woken up with a fever, so I wasn't feeling great. I got up to let Simba outside. The layout of the house was odd. You had to go into the garage to open the backyard door, and the entrance to the attic was right above it. As I was walking to the door, I felt like I was going to vomit. Not because I was sick, but because the door had a huge dirty handprint on it and a bunch of smudges from the inside. Someone had been in there. I assumed someone had broken in through the garage in the middle of the night, so I took a picture of the door and called the police. I texted my husband to tell him what was going on while I waited for the police, but unfortunately he couldn't respond until later due to work. The police came in just a few minutes since their station was right down the street. I showed them the handprints and how I couldn't understand how someone broke in because I would have heard the garage door opening. Then I realized that maybe the rustling I was hearing wasn't mice, and that the footstep I heard was actually a person. I told this to the police, and they immediately checked the attic. It turned out, some guy who lived with his family down the street from us was a meth addict, and he had been avoiding staying at his family's house, and so he had snuck into our garage when I was gone one day and had been living up there for a little over a week. Somehow pest control had missed him because he was hiding behind a bunch of boxes. Apparently the inspector was not as thorough as I had hoped. Our Ring security system never even picked the guy up on camera entering our home, so he must have entered another way. Thankfully, we no longer live in that house or area, and despite this happening a few years ago, I still get scared being home alone at night for any amount of time. I'm just thankful nobody got hurt. The year was 2006. I had moved into a house with my college friend Steven and his friend Heather. I worked overnight at a radio station a few times a week. To keep my body regulated, I kept the same schedule on my nights off, which means I was up all night with way too much time on my hands. Something I liked to do super late or past midnight was to stroll through a graveyard near my house. I usually brought a camera and a tape recorder to see if I could catch anything strange. I did this a few times and did capture a few photos that showed activity, including a strange mass of color near a bench. One night driving back home, I listened to the playback of the cassette tape in my car of what I had just recorded. On the tape, I had asked if there was anyone here with us, even though I was the only one there. A weird, exhausted voice replied with a simple no, as if to say we were the only ones there. When I heard this, I had just about driven off the road. I had chills and became terrified. I know this was the point of what I was trying to do, but I guess I didn't know how to react if I had actually caught something. When I came home, I woke up my roommate to seek some comfort. He was less than empathetic and told me not to bring that crap in the house. Shortly after this incident, things got weird. One night in my room, I was watching videos on my computer when the decorative leaves I had on the wall started swinging back and forth as if they had just been smacked by something. Another night, I had come home after purchasing some things at the store. I was in my room, and I had left a plastic bag from the store on the floor. As I was lying in bed, the bag started making a crackling sound like crumpling a bag with your hands. I looked at the bag. It was just sitting there. It kept making the sound, and soon enough started moving and hopping across the floor all by itself. I jumped up, stood on my bed, and called my roommate on the phone who was upstairs. I told him to come downstairs to my room ASAP. As soon as I got off the phone, the bag immediately stopped moving and making noises. My roommate thought I was crazy when I told him what happened. He took the bag outside and checked for what he thought might have been a mouse or something in the bag, but no such thing was found. I also had one of my worst recurring nightmares in that room. I've had a recurring nightmare since I was a kid, where I feel like my eyes are being forced shut into sleep. It happens after I wake up or before I fall asleep. My teeth always start chattering and I can barely make any audible speech to tell it to go away. I have never known what this was. The times this has happened to me, a few unpleasant things have come along with it. One time I felt hands grabbing at me. Another time I saw a horrifying face in the closet. One night in the room I began drifting off into sleep early, and in between being awake and being asleep, this thing started up again. It was very weak at first and I taunted it, saying, "Is that the best you can do?" But it became powerful and hard to fight. It felt like 30 full seconds of not being able to get out of this powerful force. I couldn't move and I felt like my body was being spun around, even though it wasn't. Finally, it stopped. I don't know if this is some sort of sleep paralysis or if what was happening in the room had anything to do with it. Early one morning at 5 a.m., what sounded like huge footsteps walking through somewhere in our place shook the whole house. Everyone was asleep except for me, of course lying in bed. It couldn't have been Steven upstairs, he was never this loud. We lived near a military base, so maybe it was from that, but the way the loud booming stomps moved in succession was like some giant person walking through. All these things were confusing and mysterious, But it wasn't until one night when I snapped a picture of the three of us in the living room that my roommate and I knew that we had a presence in the house. We were having a party. What you're looking at is me taking a picture of us in the living room with our giant mirror on the wall. I was holding my camera as still as I could, yet there seems to be activity all around us. I have no idea what those weird strings of lights are to the right of the lamp. We have nothing that would give off any kind of light like that in the house. To the right of that, there seems to be a strange mass of light imitating a figure, but the weirdest of all is the rising mass of yellow light coming between Steven and I, which looks to have eyes, a face, and a sinister smile atop a body. Maybe that yellow was a reflection from our kitchen light, but there's a lot of it. I've also tried retaking the same picture, and those yellow lights don't come up anymore. I don't know if something from the cemetery had followed me home or if there was already a presence before we moved in, but what I told you was the worst of it. And about 10 months later, we moved out of that house, not telling any future tenant or renter about it. A friend of mine, who I'll call John, was 27 at the time, and his former buddy, who I'll call Rich, was around the same age. Rich was a very daring man, if you will. John at the time was struggling with life decisions and had very little friends. Rich and John belong to a hobby group of people who are interested in fire alarms, exit signs, and other life safety equipment. Kind of an unusual hobby, but they're out there. Rich had a problem with going into abandoned buildings and stealing these devices and often bringing them home, adding them to his collection or otherwise selling them on eBay. While John didn't think it was right, he was desperate for a friend and went along with him on his adventure. But this adventure very well became a nightmare for John. On November 18th, 2019, they settled off for a trip to Gary, Indiana. And if you don't know Gary, it's not the safest place on the planet, to say the least. The trip would entail staying at a hotel in the nearby town of Hammond and heading into several abandoned schools so Rich could basically steal old and oftentimes rare life safety equipment. It was going well for them until November 20th. This day at approximately 7 at night, John and Rich went to the abandoned Horace S. Norton Elementary School at 1356 Harrison Boulevard. They started making their way through the first floor. The doors were wide open, and I mean wide open. The building smelled like sewage, skunk, and shit all mixed together. They made their way to the north end wing of the building, and John watched Rich rip down several old exit signs. Again, John and I are against that, but John was desperate for a friend. As they made their way down to the south side of the building, they entered the cafeteria. It was pitch black except for the beam of their flashlights. And there was some graffiti, desks, and books scattered. You know, the typical abandoned building scenes. John was taking pictures throughout. After the cafeteria, they made their way to the gym. Little did John know his life was about to change forever. John noticed a trail of blood with his flashlight, and out of curiosity decided to follow it, and what it led to was quite disturbing. A 27-year-old female laid there dead in a pool of blood. It was gruesome as hell. Her arms were up, with her hands in the shape of a dinosaur, as John put it. Just the way John described the scene to me made me lose sleep for a couple nights. John screamed and ran into Rich, and Rich whispered, "Shh, they may hear us." John was shaken up and showed Rich the body, to which he said, "Just don't say anything to anybody and we'll pretend this never happened." They left immediately, but obviously shaking. As soon as they got back to the hotel, John called the police. Sure enough, the woman had been missing for 2 days prior. It didn't take long for the police to track down a text conversation between the woman, who was now identified as 27-year-old Adriana Saucedo, and her murderer. She was planning to buy some weed and an iPhone apparently, and the suspects had intended to rob her. The robbery went wrong, and they ended up killing her. Not before dragging her body into the gym of the elementary school and casually dumping it there just a day before John and Rich went there. Sure enough, it didn't take long for the police to track down the teen murderer and put him in custody. The teen also turned in 2 others as well. All of these kids were charged as adults, and the story is on the news as well. John is no longer friends with Rich, for obvious reasons, and this event still haunts John and I to this day.
Hello. Please leave a message after the tone.
This first one comes from Jade from Seattle. After college, Jade and her boyfriend Steve wanted to live together. They had talked about this since they were freshmen in college together often, and eventually they started their lives together. But unfortunately, all has not been happily ever after so far. For some time, almost every day after work, Jade will come home to unwanted gifts from a stranger. Gift baskets full of things like jewelry and other expensive items, and on other occasions flowers with letters. But every single time there would be a gift basket left, it would include a photo of Jade out in public with family, friends, her dog, or her boyfriend. One day, Jade took the basket into the house and began crying, causing Steve to come running to her side. Steve was furious, as he knew this wasn't just a sign of harassment, but also stalking. Steve would later install security cameras around the house. After a nice dinner one night, Jade was taking a bath and was listening to some relaxing music when she heard her phone ding. It was a text from an unknown number saying, "I'm outside." Jade screamed, causing Steve to rush in and see the text. So Steve checked the cameras through his phone and saw a tall man was at their doorstep. The man stood there for about 5 minutes before leaving in the direction of the woods. This was a screenshot of the man standing at the door with a black mask over his face. Jade also attached this video she recorded of herself home alone one night while Peter was at work, and the man came to the house knocking on the windows as she texted her mother and grandma in fear. After calling the police, they didn't provide much assistance to Jade, only suggesting she change her phone number. Fast forward a few nights, and Jade began to hear her phone go off at around 3 a.m. It was the same unknown number calling her. She didn't pick up the call, and about a minute or two later, Jade's phone vibrated, notifying her of a voicemail left from the number. This was the voicemail.
I don't have a house. I don't have any friends. No love. I have nothing to lie on. I have no eyes. No fear in me. I have no meaning. But I have this urge to kill. This is my world, and I'm the one who controls this. It's not a bloody game. I'll take you at any time, and you can do anything. I know you best, where you are, how fast you can run, and what scares you. I'm real. I'm not a legend or story. I took the souls.
The next morning, Jade and Steve went to the police station together to show them all the proof of what was happening. This was fairly recently that Jade sent me this, and the case is apparently still under investigation. She says the man still occasionally leaves unwanted gifts to this day. On November 21st, 2018, at around 1 in the morning, a young man named Dylan received a very strange and alarming voicemail. At the time he received the voicemail, he was asleep and didn't notice it until a few weeks later. This was the voicemail.
Hey Dylan, I just wanted to know, why is your bed that color? It's really nice looking out in the closet. It's a really nice blue and white bed. So tell me, what is your favorite scary movie? Or are you the scary movie?
Dylan said he had no idea who the girl was. He didn't recognize the voice. Yet whoever it was had his number, knew his name, and knew the color of his bed, blue and white. The girl on the other end claims to have been in his closet, and whether that was true or not, the intent of the call was obviously to scare Dylan, and admittedly, it would be a very unsettling voicemail for anyone to listen to. At the end, she asks what his favorite scary movie is, which could have been a reference to the movie Scream.
What's your favorite scary movie?
I don't know.
Dylan reported the call to the police, who apparently weren't able to help since Dylan had taken so long to report it. When he would try to call the number back, it would dial to a weird random number, which led to an invalid number error.
Completed as dialed. Please check the number and dial again.
lot of women's worst fear are stalkers. People like the guy you just heard about in Jade's story. It's a much bigger and more common problem than most people realize. The voicemail you're about to hear was sent on December 14th of 2022 to a girl named Sasha. Sasha lives with 3 friends from her sorority in a house that they rent in Syracuse, New York. Sasha met a seemingly nice and normal guy while out in town with her friends. They spoke very briefly and she gave him her number. The man's name was Jeremy, and he doesn't go to school at Syracuse University like Sasha does. Rather, he was a local in the area. The two arranged to go on a date for drinks and dinner at a nearby bar. According to Sasha, the date didn't go well in her opinion, as he radiated unusual vibes, and she thought he was weird. She split the bill with him because she knew there wouldn't be a second date and she wanted to do the right thing. He dropped her back home after the date, and sent 3 texts later that night about how much fun he had and how much he liked her. It added to the discomfort for Sasha. Instead of responding, she hearted one of the messages, but the text continued on and on every single day, until the point that she decided to block him. Unfortunately, this was not the end. On the night of December 14th at 2:15 a.m., when everyone in the house was asleep, Sasha got an anonymous call that left this voicemail.
Sasha, it's Jeremy. I don't know why you can't answer any of my calls or texts. I think it's pretty fucked up. You shouldn't leave your windows open, by the way. I'm whispering because I don't want to wake you, but I left you a surprise on the kitchen table.
At the end of the call, you can hear a door shutting. This was the front door of Sasha's rental house, and the sound of the door closing alerted one of her housemates, who woke up everyone in the house to ask who just shut the front door. All 4 girls were in the house though, and it was none of them. This was when Sasha noticed the voicemail and listened to it with her housemates. What Jeremy left on the kitchen table was a stuffed animal turtle, Sasha's favorite animal, which she mentioned on her date with Jeremy. Alongside it was a Christmas card that simply said "Merry Christmas" from Jeremy. This prompted the girls to call the police, and Sasha showed the police officer the texts and the voicemail. The voicemail was self-incriminating enough, and the non-stop text from Jeremy backed up the story. It was enough for the police to find Jeremy and charge him for breaking and entering and stalking. He only did a week in jail and was sentenced to community service and multiple fines. It's been a month and a half now, and Sasha has not heard from Jeremy. In the year 2015, an elderly woman from Greeley, Colorado with failing vision received this voicemail you're about to hear on her landline phone. In a panic from hearing the voicemail, the woman called her son from the neighbor's phone in a state of hysteria, stating someone had taken over her home phone. Her neighbor checked out the phone for her, and after telling her it was okay, she calmed down, but a few days later it happened again. The woman was truly petrified this time and once again went to her neighbor for consolation, but this time refused to go back to her house. Her neighbor called the woman's son to tell him about the situation, so the son took time off of work and traveled to Colorado the next day to help her. After testing the phone to see if anything was wrong, it seemed completely fine, but he planned to stay with her the following week to make sure she was okay. The son was horrified when he discovered what was really going on. When she had lifted the receiver, rather than the dial tone, she heard this message.
Connecting you. Please hold the line.
NORAD, EWS, Station Zulu Foxtrot 77. Zulu Foxtrot 77. Status alert Con 4. Status alert Con 4. Security tracing in progress.
The message would come around the same time every day for the next few days, between 7 p.m. and 7:15 p.m. Any other time of day, there was a normal dial tone, and the phone worked normally. The weirdest part was that the phone wouldn't ring at these times. The recording was heard instead of the dial tone if they lifted the receiver to make a call between 7 and 7:15 p.m. The son recorded the message, and the next day, the phone was dead for most of the day, unusable. Upon calling the phone company, They said they couldn't do anything as nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary from their end. That evening, the son tried to take another recording to see whether the message had changed, but it was just the dial tone now. The message was never heard through the phone again. The mother was still afraid to pick up the phone for a long time after this, causing the son to post the recordings online to see if anyone on the internet would have a clue to the meaning behind the recording. And while some people suggest that it may be some kind of secret government message or code, no one seems to know for sure. On October 29th of 2009 at 10:45 a.m., Braxton McCannon's mother kept receiving calls from his sister's phone. This was strange because Braxton's sister was home at the time, so as Braxton's mother left her room to go ask her daughter why she was calling her, she met her in the hallway. Braxton's sister was already on her way to her mom's room to tell her about the phone mysteriously calling her mother over and over again, and how it was scaring her. It was not her who was making the phone calls. It was her phone itself. The phone was currently still inside her room as they were talking, and during that time, Braxton's sister's phone called their mother again. This was proof to their mother that it was in fact not her daughter making the phone calls, as she was standing right there. This chilling realization wasn't the creepiest part though. This time there was a voicemail left after the call.
Message skipped. Save message.
In the voicemail, you can hear Braxton's sister's radio playing in her room. Then, unexpectedly, the radio cuts off and a completely random, disturbing sound starts blasting into the phone. The sound almost resembles a horrific screaming. Braxton noted that what's extra weird is that if this were a ghost dial, meaning any form of accidental call, the phone would have left a substantially longer message. But instead, it just hangs up after a few seconds on its own.
Hello, no one is available to take your call. Please leave a message after the tone.
Having moved to his West Texas home not even half a year ago, a 28-year-old viewer who I'll refer to as John sent me this voicemail that he received in August of 2021 from an unknown number. John was going about his night when his cell phone began to ring, and on the screen it said no caller ID. This is rather unusual, as for anybody to come up on someone's phone as no caller ID means they went out of their way to intentionally hide their number. Often doctors will do this to keep their privacy from their patients, but other than this and a few other professional circumstances, this is usually at least a slight red flag. John let the call go to voicemail, not wanting to potentially get stuck on the phone with somebody he didn't want to be talking to. This was the voicemail he received.
Hey, I'm outside your house. I found your info online and I could really use a job. Could you open the door?
The message was short but direct. John immediately thought it was a joke or that they had the wrong number, but naturally he was curious. Either way, he knew he didn't want to open the front door, especially if someone was actually out there. But the man saying that John found his info online made him open up Google and search his own name. The second result on Google led to an online corporation database that listed all of John's public info, including his first and last name, phone number, and new home address. John is self-employed, but for the purpose of tax benefits, he started an S corporation in his name, literally with his name in the title of the business. This means his S corp, along with his name, would eventually be listed on numerous online corporate database websites. Coming to this realization, the voicemail suddenly seemed more legitimate. John went downstairs and inched closer to the front door, trying to be quiet. Someone started to bang on the front door, and a voice from the other side was saying something, but his voice was muffled.
John ignored the knocking until it stopped, but seconds later his phone vibrated again as he received a call, again with a no caller ID message. He ignored it again, incredibly scared. Another voicemail was left. This time there was no talking in it though. The knocking on the front door stopped, but moments later, a knocking from the back door ensued. He took out his phone and started to record again. As he turned on the lights, revealing the silhouette on the other side, the situation became even more real for John. The guy called one more time, and Joe picked up, saying, "I have a gun, and I already called the police." The man on the other end claimed he was just looking for work, and he apologized and hung up. Then the knocking ceased. John contacted the websites displaying his personal information the next day, but they refused to remove the info. So he went through the process of changing his business name to no longer include his actual name. It's very unlikely anybody who's knocking on both your front and back door late at night and calling your number anonymously is there just looking for a job. If John opened the door, this probably would have had a much different outcome. This was the voicemail received by the girlfriend of viewer Alex Azeri. Alex's girlfriend reached out to him right after hearing it for the first time to get his opinion on it, since his name could slightly be heard in there, to which all he could offer was equal confusion and concern. He assumed it was one of his friends pranking him at first, but after reaching out to all of his friends, they all claimed it wasn't them, and each of them thought it was equally creepy.
I'm trapped in the bottom.
Alex had no outgoing calls, and the person specifically called his girlfriend while mentioning his name, so somehow they must have gotten both of their contact info. Alex and his girlfriend live in different states, and very few people in his life have her number. The voicemail itself is very hard to understand. In the beginning it sounds like there may be a second person in the background, but it's all very muffled. You can, however, clearly hear that someone is crying into the phone.
I'm trapped in the bottom.
At this point it sounds as though someone is speaking, though it's very difficult to understand. It sounds like they're saying, "I'm trapped in the dark," although it could be something else. At first, Alex was unsure if this was just a prank, a hacker, or something else, but after receiving this voicemail, Alex claims a number of strange occurrences happened in his house that same day and the following. First, a door upstairs slammed shut randomly while everyone in the house was downstairs eating dinner. Upon inspecting the bedroom, nobody was inside. Alex and his brother also apparently heard what sounded like footsteps coming up the stairs when they were home alone. At first, they considered the possibility it may have been one of their two dogs, until checking and remembering they had a dog gate standing at the bottom of the stairs, preventing them from coming up the stairs. Each time they looked around the hole upstairs and checked the stairway, they couldn't find anyone. The footsteps also didn't sound like those of a dog. They were reportedly heavier and more spaced out, like a person's footsteps. With this happening the same day and one day after receiving this concerning, unexplainable voicemail, Alex believes the occurrences may all be linked. In this video you're about to watch, a couple briefly documents they're listening to two creepy voicemails received on the husband's phone.
Hey man, how are you?
How you doing?
Good.
Ready for the big trip?
Ready for the big trip.
Okay, that sounds good.
They had been receiving strange voicemails for weeks already, both on their cell phones and on the landline. In this video though, the man's phone doesn't even ring. He just gets two straight to voicemail notifications, no phone number or any contact details attached to the voicemail.
was just sitting where you were, and my voicemail just went off. No ringing, nothing. It just. And last Tuesday, it was about a 5-minute voicemail on the.
Okay, so that's what your mother-in-law heard too, right?
Yeah.
I call that
So the couple inquired about the calls from the phone company as well, both before and after this video. However, they did not have any records of the audio message being received. The couple described the voicemails as sounding like somebody was being tortured, or some kind of creature was screaming into the phone. The couple would also hear strange sounds in the house at night for a week, such as cabinets closing from the kitchen. They believed that what they were dealing with was supernatural. In February of 2021, 30-year-old Martha Ramirez woke up on a Saturday morning with a notification on her iPhone that said voicemail from an unknown number. Upon listening to it, this is what she heard.
Martha. 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 Martha.
The voice you just heard in the voicemail was of Martha's father. This caused her a great deal of confusion and horror. But why? Why was this even remotely concerning? Well, Martha lost her dad to cancer in 2019. At the time this voicemail was left, he had been dead for almost 2 years. She listened to the voicemail over and over, trying to think of any other possible person it could be. But she knew her dad's voice. She knew the way her dad's voice sounded saying her name. She tried to think back to if her dad had ever left a voicemail simply repeating her name multiple times, but she couldn't remember a single instance. Even if she could, that wouldn't explain randomly receiving a voicemail of her father's voice years later. She called their service provider, but they were not able to trace anonymous calls. She asked her entire family if any of them were playing a messed up joke, but when she sent all of them the voicemail, they were all equally disturbed. She claimed she was never a religious person at all, nor is she a believer in the supernatural, but she also doesn't believe this was the work of anybody she knew, or any kind of glitch. She says she actually believes this was her dad's voice contacting her, and it terrifies her deeply. This last voicemail was posted to Reddit 3 years ago. Part of the Reddit post read, "To make a long story short, my significant other got a new phone. For the first time, she has visual voicemail. A family member left her a voicemail today, and when checking it, discovered she had several missed voicemails. She started going through the voicemails. Typical stuff, family, bill collectors, but one voicemail dated Friday, June 9th, 2017 at 4:38 p.m. was from a number we do not know. What you just heard was just a small clip from the original 3-minute long audio, which seems to have been removed from the internet without a trace. In this small audio clip though, it sounds like the girl on the other end is saying please help me, and even they have my baby. The rest of the Reddit post read, it's 3 minutes long, and the area code is 480, placing the owner around the Phoenix, Arizona Valley. I've spent all day researching news where their incidents happened the afternoon of June 9th, 2017, and have exhausted my very limited abilities in researching. None of our family members or friends recognize the number either. The voicemail was dated almost a year ago and was not discovered until today. I will be contacting Phoenix police to provide them with the audio, timestamp, and phone number. I *67 the number, it went straight to voicemail. Significant other has had the same phone number for 10 years. Based on a lot of the original replies to the thread, the original audio was so horrific that many couldn't even get through it all. Still, some people believe it to be a hoax. Either way, this voicemail and whoever was behind it still remain a mystery.
If you're like most people, you've probably at one point had the experience of your alarm clock becoming a part of your dream before waking up. Or perhaps had some other sound like the TV you left on before falling asleep influence your dreams. But what would happen if reality influenced your dreams during a nightmare? Well, it would probably only add to the horror. While all of the stories on this list are creepy, some are more unexplainable than others. Here are 5 first-hand stories of people whose nightmares have strangely read into reality. Number 5. This story was submitted to me by Earl Feinhardt. It was a long and stressful day, so falling asleep was easy. I think a dream started to fade in around halfway through the night. It wasn't a pleasant dream. I'll try to describe it the best I could. I was in the woods outside of a giant castle. Everything was black except for the night sky, which had a hint of blue. I remember this horrifying sound coming from inside the castle, as if something were calling me. It's downright disturbing to think about it even now. The sound was some kind of demonic, hellish voice, and it echoed through the woods. I somehow knew it was coming from inside the castle, and yet it sounded as if the source of the sound was a few hundred feet away from me. This was not a lucid dream. I had no conscious control over myself, so I made my way to the castle. There were no doors. It was as if the inside of this castle was also the outside. I don't know how else to describe it. The sound of the demonic voice was no doubt getting louder, and as I walked the open corridors of the castle, the halls started to become more narrow, and I felt myself banging into the walls as I dragged myself along. The sounds of the screaming were coming from beyond a door on my left. I entered, and I swear to God, there was nothing but blackness in the room. And yet, I still felt myself moving closer to the sound. I banged into something, and that's when I woke up, hunched over my 4-year-old son's bed, who was crying and horrified. He had been screaming because he also had a nightmare, and I scared him even more, as he described the way I walked in and then stopped in front of his bed, slowly lowering myself closer to him. Number 4. This story was posted by a forum user named Joey Mancuso. I just want to point out before sharing my story that I am an atheist and do not believe in any kinds of miracles, gods, or anything of that sort. However, I still don't know how to explain this. I was having a really disturbing dream. It seemed to be Halloween night, and I was with my friends trick-or-treating. We hit 2 houses. The first one was normal from what I remember. When we rang the doorbell to a second house, the door opened on its own into a darkish blue living room. I stepped inside, and my friends were gone at this point. I looked around the room I was in. The door I had just entered from no longer existed. In fact, the whole room seemed to have rapidly changed appearance, a common occurrence in dreams. After exploring the house, I came to a room upstairs, even though I didn't remember climbing the stairs. On the wall I was facing was a giant framed picture, at least 10 meters long and 20 meters wide. The picture was of my 30-year-old cousin, who I hadn't seen in years. Her eyes were enlarged to an uncomfortable amount, and they followed me everywhere I went. The giant portrait suddenly cracked, and the rusty, scratchy, ear-piercing sound of the giant nails holding the portrait on the wall painfully filled my eardrums. The portrait started to fall off the wall, and I watched, completely frozen, as it fell on top of me. But before it could crush me, I was awake. It was maybe 5 in the morning. Minutes after waking up, my cell phone rang. I picked up. It was my uncle, calling to tell me that my cousin had just overdosed on heroin and died. Number 3. I was having a nightmare that started off with me in my house reading a newspaper. Then the lights went out, and the dream started to focus on my trying to find out why the power was cut. The fuse box was apparently in the basement in this dream, which is, by the way, inaccurate to real life. I went down to the basement with a flashlight and opened up the fuse box. There was a sticky note inside, saying, "Go back upstairs to the red room." While still in the basement, I started to hear a moaning type sound coming from the boiler room/laundry room. My brain knew my childhood fears, and it seemed to be taking advantage of them in this nightmare. The door to the boiler room cracked open, and something poked its head out to look at me. I left the basement after seeing this, following the sticky notes orders. I went upstairs to the second floor of the house, and there was a glowing red door at the end of the hall, a door that doesn't actually exist in my real house. Now, there was a disturbing echoing sound coming from beyond the door, and as I got closer, it became more clear that it was a voice, chanting the number 314, 314. I opened the door, and there was just a chair in the room, facing the wall across from me. The room was as red as the glow that had been illuminating through the door. The voice chanting 314 was clearer now. It was an extremely creepy voice, almost feeling like it was speaking into my ear. I woke up abruptly, with my heart beating somewhat quickly. I grabbed my iPhone that was sitting on the desk next to me to check the time. It was 3:14 a.m. You may think I just saw a clock while half awake or something, but I have no digital clocks in my room. The only clock would be the one on my iPhone that was in the same position as I had left it before going to bed. To this day, I have no idea how my dream knew it was 3:14, or if there was supposed to be some kind of meaning behind it. Number 2. This one was from an Ask Reddit post. It was a night during the summer 2015. I was high out of my mind after a party. I was fortunate enough to not get caught by my parents as I walked to my room to get straight to bed. I was at the part of my high where I was just exhausted and wanted to get some sleep, and so I fell asleep in probably 10 minutes or less. Have you ever heard about that idea that smoking pot and then going to sleep high alters your dreams or gives you some kind of enhanced dreaming capabilities? Well, after this one, I won't be fighting that theory. I don't remember anything before this dream. It started out with me in the woods in the middle of the night. In real life, you would just be surrounded by trees and the sounds of night critters, nothing special. But being that this was a dream, it was much worse. There were ghostly wind sounds coming from everywhere. Instead of bug noises, there were wolf howls and sounds of footsteps coming from behind me. There was that magically horrifying feeling of a dream that you just can't describe, but it made it so much more than just being trapped in the woods. I found myself running away from the footsteps that were consistently the same distance behind me until reaching a building in the middle of the woods. Of course, I went inside and boarded the door shut with planks that seemed to have come out of nowhere. This dream seemed to have gone on forever, too long to describe it all, but to summarize, I was in that building, which turned out to be a house, and the footsteps that were following me from outside were circling the house. I tried to find a weapon, but the house was almost completely empty. Everything was black and white at this point. While sitting on a couch in the living room, one of the only pieces of furniture there was a shadow that appeared at the window, and shortly after, the figure standing outside knocked on the window. It kept knocking and knocking until I woke up, but the knocking didn't stop. I jumped out of bed when I realized someone was at my window, looking in and knocking. I squealed for my dad, and the figure at the window ran off. I'm still open to the possibility that my high hadn't completely worn off, and that it might have been a partial wake-up hallucination, but it was also so real that, at the same time, I have to believe it actually happened. The sound was real, and the figure at my window was real. My dad and I looked around the property to find no one. He told me I just had a bad dream and to go back to sleep. I hope he was right. Number 1. I was having a horrifying dream, possibly the most disturbing nightmare of my life. I was in my house, or the closest thing to my house that my dream could produce. Ironically enough, I was in bed in this dream, or at least I can only start remembering past the point of my lying in bed, and all of a sudden, the sound came from downstairs. I walked downstairs in the dark, not turning on any lights, to where I thought the sound was coming from. I was on my middle floor now. The dream was telling me to go downstairs to my laundry room, and so I did. But as I got there, expecting the noise to be louder and closer, it sounded like it was just as far as before. Now I was going upstairs to the kitchen, and it's strange. Outside of every window was complete blackness, not general nighttime darkness, There was nothingness. I think all that existed in this dream was my house. Now my dream started to suggest that the banging sounds were coming from upstairs, so I went back upstairs and was eventually led to the attic door. It was surely beyond that door. I opened it. There was an old woman standing by a bunch of boxes. She was slowly but loudly slamming her hand on one of the boxes, producing an unnatural sound. I tried to quietly step back away from the attic, but the old woman turned around, opened her mouth twice as wide as anyone humanly could, reached out her arms, began to scream, and leaped toward me. That's when I woke up. I thought it was just a horrific dream, but when I heard a bang coming from downstairs, a bang similar to what I heard in my dream, I felt my heart completely drop. On my way downstairs, there was another bang. It was the front door. I got the butcher knife from my knife holder in the kitchen and crouched behind the door. I was waiting for the next time he would pound on the door and I would warn him to go away. I waited for a good minute in silence and finally decided to take a quick look through the window. There was somebody standing in my driveway. I couldn't tell if he was facing me or looking at me or not, but he was surely the one who was pounding on my door at 4 in the morning. He walked away down the sidewalk moments after he must have noticed me. The pounding on my door was the kind of pounding you would expect from someone trying to break in a door, not to get a house owner's attention. I thought it was just crazy and horrifying that the pounding and banging from this potential robber or killer didn't wake me up, rather became the key point to a horrifying dream.